Start off, please remove your hats and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, real quick, I'd like to introduce some, to my left is Ken Fetterman, our solicitor. Also, we have our stenographer, Cindy Oliveira. And I'd like to, our new director of L&I, I'd like to congratulate Bob McTeague. He's our new director. And real quick, I'd like to thank Tom Scott, also the outgoing director of L&I, for all his help over the years. So, Mr. Secretary, can you call the board for me, please?
Sure. Colleen Dunn? Here. Jim McMahon?
Here.
Ed Murphy? Here.
Yeah, one other thing before we get started. Please, when you're on the microphone, just make sure the green light's on, please, everybody that comes up. One other thing, I see a lot of people in the audience. You will get your chance to speak, so when the applicant's giving their presentation, please no outburst, no, any derogatory remarks. You will get your chance, I promise. So with that being said, let's get this party started. Bristol Realty Group, LLC, P.O. Box 5, Flowertown, PA. Please come on up. You can give your presentation and then you can call your witnesses, right, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, normally they
And then
stand right there.
Yeah, we'll swear them in. Yeah.
We need a mic for him.
Needs a microphone.
Well, we can give one of these to your witness, too. Do I put this over here for your witness?
Yeah, that would be good, thank you. All right, I'm going to hand up my exhibit packets before I get started. All right. That includes the mailings? Includes the mailings, right. And the posting. Thank you. We've got our certified receipts in there. Good. Okay, we're good to go on the notices.
Okay, I'm going to start while they're setting up. I have a little intro that I'll go over.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm William Kerr. I'm an attorney with High Swartz in Norristown. Here tonight representing Bristol Realty Group. Properties 1502 to 1510 Haynes Road. Bristol Realty is the record owner. They've owned the property since 2013. The principals in Bristol Realty are husband and wife Christopher Lee and Lee Gove, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. N-G-O-V, Gove, it's pronounced the Gove. This property is an existing property with multiple buildings and multiple uses. And it was in that condition when they purchased it, when Bristol Realty purchased it. It includes separate buildings with the following uses. There's a C1 office use, and in the same building, there's a D27 small residence in combination with that C1 office. There's also a retail pharmacy, which is a D1 retail commercial use. There's also a restaurant with takeout, which is a D5 use. Those are the three buildings in the front. You'll see the plan momentarily. D17A auto sales use. There's also a D18 auto repair use. And then the main use that we're here this evening for is the prior owner at some point had installed a whole series of tractor trailer trailers, which they rented out for storage. And my clients purchased the property in that condition. And last fall, they received a violation notice from the township. And it was the first time we had any indication that the current property was not legalized or was not recognized by the township. So in looking at various options, it was decided we were going to come in and just try to clean the property up and get rid of those trailers and formalize the storage use with a series of buildings. So what we're proposing is to maintain the office, the residence, the pharmacy, the restaurant uses, eliminate the storage trailers, the auto sales, and then replace them with a new mini storage facility. We have been to the council, the supervisors, I guess, for the project, and they were in support, essentially in support of cleaning the property up and changing it to this use. Now, we were originally planning to present here on September 13th. Just before the hearing, we learned there was a discrepancy with our plan and the rear property line. There was essentially an overlap between our rear property line and the property to the rear. Mr. David Sauerbutz is here. He represents Mrs. Marion, I believe it's Marion Vendetti, correct? Marion Vendetti. And we had this dispute where our property encroached over theirs. So we had to do some research. We looked into it, determined that our deed description was correct, her deed description was correct. So what we've decided to do to resolve that is we're basically giving up that strip of property and just acknowledging her property as the property line. So I'll go through that in a minute when we have the plans, and also our engineer will discuss that. So there was a minor change in the plans from September 13th to now. I've included both plans in your exhibit packet, and we'll go through those just so you can see the difference. I have three witnesses. One is Chris Lee, who's, again, the principal. I have Mr. Greg Elko, who's our civil engineer, and then Joe Davidson, who's our architect. So at this point, what I'd like to do you want to put the plans up, Greg? The engineering plans? Do you want to swear all three witnesses at the same time, just for efficiency?
That's fine.
Okay. So could each of you state your full name for the record, and then we're going to have you sworn in?
Christopher Stephen Lee. Joseph Michael Davidson.
And Gregory Elko.
Can you raise your right hands, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to start off with Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, good evening. You've already stated your full name. Did you hear my statements here this evening to the board?
Yes.
And were they accurate?
Correct. Yeah.
And do you adopt them as your own testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Is this property your primary source of income?
No.
You have another job?
Correct. Yes.
So this is a real estate investment that you and your wife acquired, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is your wife a real estate investor or developer?
No.
Okay. So, and is this the first property that you would ever purchase like this as an investment?
Yes.
And when you purchased the property, did you believe it was all legal, and that it was zoning compliant?
Yes.
And did you have any indication that it was not?
No.
When was the first time that you determined that there was a zoning issue?
September 2020 when we got the notice.
Okay. And that notice indicated that the trailers were illegal, correct?
Yes.
And after you learned of that issue, what did you do?
We contacted High Schwartz Law Firm and Langdon Engineering.
Okay. And you just decided to proceed in the way that we're proceeding this evening? With
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Now, as far as the existing property, are you aware of any? Have you received any complaints from your neighbors since you've owned this property since you purchased the property in 2013?
No.
And are there any current parking problems on the property that you're aware of?
No.
Now, did you distribute the notices to the neighbors that were required to be distributed?
Yes, they're mailed out.
Okay, they were mailed out. Okay, that's all that I have for Mr. Lee, if anyone has any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Lee? So when you bought this property, you weren't aware of the zoning, no, the real estate agent didn't advise you, or nobody mentioned to you that it may be an issue?
No, it was the previous owner. They said they were doing it for like 10+ years,
Right.
and it was there for a long time.
So the previous owner never had a problem with the township?
No, no.
Up to that point?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Lee? Okay, next witness.
Okay, and just an additional point, now that you've heard that, we could get into the history of the property and try to make an argument that there's a vested right to the trailers and the uses as they exist. But we decided we're not going to do that. We're just going to present the new plan and ask for the variances for to allow the existing to stay and then the new storage use to be created, okay? All right, so the next witness is Greg Elko. Good evening, Greg.
Good evening.
I just wanted to go over your credentials a little bit. You're managing principal at Langen Engineering, correct?
Yes,
And they're located in Warrington, Pennsylvania?
yes.
And what kind of responsibilities do you have there as the managing principal?
Yeah, I manage the office in Warrington. There's about 90 people in the office. I'm a registered civil engineer in the state of Pennsylvania. I have my master's degree and bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Rutgers University. I've been given presentations and testimony, various.
We're familiar with your
Thank you.
credentials.
Oh, you're not,
It's
okay,
acceptable.
Thank you.
okay. And his resume is included
I
at
see it.
Exhibit 11A. All right, could you just go through your presentation, give us a little history of the application, the property as it exists, and then the plan? Okay?
Absolutely. Should we switch places?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Maybe easier for you to do it here. Thank you. Okay, good evening. So just some brief history about this particular application. The original application was made in August of this year, and as was mentioned, the survey, we were presented some additional information about the property line, notably along our rear property, the Vendetti property, the property line that's common with that adjacent neighbor. And it caused us to revise our survey and basically shrink the site a little bit. The property line in question was adjusted by roughly 11.5 feet. It basically was pulled closer to Haynes Road. And as a result, we had to basically revise the plans and resubmit them in November, and that's what we're here tonight to present to you. So I want to refer to our Exhibit 7. This is the exhibit that's in the package. This is our drawing VL101. It's the boundary and topographic survey of the property, dated November 10th, 2021. I'll walk through some of the existing site conditions for you. So the site is located at 1506 Haynes Road. It has business addresses 1502 through 1510 Haynes Road. It's one tax lot, 575-228. It's approximately 2.2 acres in size. It's located along Haynes Road. It's about 500 feet from the Bristol Pike and Haynes Road intersection. As was described, it contains a variety of different uses. I'm going to walk through them, referring to them as the use designations that are identified in your ordinance. So there's an existing two-story building that contains a C1 office use and a D27 dwelling use. That's the existing building that's closest to the northern property line. And again, north is to the left side of the sheet here. There's a one-story building containing a D1 use. That's the pharmacy. That's the center building in the site on the plan. There's a one-story building containing a D1 retail shop and a D5 fast food restaurant use. That's the restaurant that's there. That's the southern part of the site. There's a one-story building behind the restaurant that contains a D17A automotive sales use and a D18 automotive repair use. And then the storage use, which is an F8 use, basically occupies the bulk of the remainder of the property. That is the containers, the outdoor storage areas, the fenced-in areas that contain all of the storage units that you see on the site. The total building area is about 10,236 square feet. And I want to note that that building area includes the overhangs that are exterior to the building walls. That's based on the definition of building that's in the town ordinance. The site is served by public utilities. So there's 4 driveways along Haynes Road. The northernmost driveway is an enter-only driveway. Then there are 2 driveways on either side of the existing freestanding side that are full movement, and then the southern driveway is an exit only. So in this very limited frontage, we have 4 driveways. As far as natural resources go, there's no areas of floodplains, no areas of wetlands, floodplain soils, woodlands, waters of the Commonwealth within the property. There are a couple areas, small areas of steep slopes along the Delaware Canal, but by and large, the site is free and clear of natural resources. Surrounding the site, there are to the north residential uses, including a single-family dwelling at 1514 Haynes Road and an apartment complex at 1522 Haynes Road. So that's along the northern property line. To the east, which is up on the plan, straight up, there's a single-family dwelling along Kenwood Drive South. That's the Vendetti residence. To the south is the Delaware River Canal, and to the west, that's to the bottom of the sheet of paper that you're looking at, is Haynes Road, and there's single-family dwellings across Haynes Road along Junewood Drive. A few other items to note that are relevant for the zoning relief we're seeking. Along the northern property line, so again, along the left side of the sheet, there's a paper street. It's 7th Avenue right-of-way. It shows up on your tax map. It showed up in our title search, but it's not a constructed road. It's basically just a right-of-way that has green space in it. It's considered a frontage because it is a public street, but it's essentially a street that is unimproved. Also, there is one encroachment of an existing shed onto the subject property. That's to the from the dwelling to the north at 1514 Haynes Road. It encroaches by about 2 feet into the property. In the existing condition, there are 8 parking spaces that are within the township right-of-way along Haynes Road. And of those 8 spaces, 6 of them back out into Haynes Road. That's the only way to access them. The other 2 are within internal into the site. The existing freestanding sign is within the Haynes Road right-of-way. The driveway access is not aligned with Junewood Drive. That's relevant. And then there's a variety of non-conformities on the site, which I'll get into in a moment, that deal with just the existing uses, the existing structures, the setbacks that exist on the property. I'm going to refer now to Exhibit 9B. 9B is our zoning plan, last revised November 10th, 2021. This is the plan that depicts the proposed improvements on the property. So as was mentioned, there was a zoning violation issued in September of 2020 that required the removal of the storage containers, the abandoned vehicles, the junk and trash on the property. And what this development will do, it will allow the cleanup of the site, basically to remedy the zoning violation that's there and provide a nice amenity on the property. So what's being proposed is, again, removal of the storage units, the dilapidated fencing, the abandoned vehicles, all the outdoor storage areas, and the construction of a self-storage facility. That facility is considered an F4 use in your zoning ordinance. It's a mini warehouse, essentially. The definition is a structure containing separate storage spaces which are leased to the general public for the purpose of storing items generally stored in residential structures. So the proposed construction includes 5 new buildings. They're designated A through F on the plan. There's 113 units shown. They're varying size of units. I do want to say that 113 units is approximate. The units can be configured so that there's more smaller units or less smaller units and more larger units, but right now the plan shows 113 total units. And the conversion of the existing office building that's behind the restaurant to a self-storage office. Some features include a gated entry. We are going to propose paving of all of the access drives. Most of the areas are not paved today, so we're going to pave most of the site within the areas of the development. There's parking proposed for the self-storage facility. In addition to that, there's combined parking and loading spaces in various parts of the site of the loading facility. There's a 6-foot privacy fence, a chain link fence with privacy slats surrounding the facility to serve not only as a buffer, but as a security measure. And then we're adding buffers around the northern and western sides of the property where none exist today, and I'll get to that in a moment. Some other site improvements, we're essentially cleaning up the frontage of the site. We're constructing paved driveway accesses and parking lots throughout the property. We're essentially consolidating the driveways along the frontage. Those two driveways that I mentioned that are on either sides of the sign, we are proposing to consolidate that into one driveway that aligns with Junewood Drive across the way. And the parking spaces that back out onto Haynes Road will be removed. The freestanding sign will be relocated. We're adding sidewalks, crosswalks, and curbing along the frontage of the property. And we're going to add trash enclosures to the property. And we're proposing also an optional outdoor fenced-in area to serve as the patio for the restaurant should the applicant wish to construct this. All of the remaining uses other than the storage uses are going to stay on the property. So that's the office building, the pharmacy, the apartment, the retail, and the restaurant facility. The buildings along the frontage will remain. The storage use behind those buildings will be removed in favor of this self-storage facility. And the total building area is 29,439 square feet. We are going to propose an easement for the encroachment that I mentioned before of the shed. I want to show you the landscape plan. This is Exhibit 9C, which is our drawing LP 101 titled Landscape Planting Plan, dated November 10th. The purpose of this plan is not to show the landscaping for the entire development, but to focus in on the buffer areas. What's being proposed is essentially landscaping, evergreen buffering and screening along the northern and western property lines. Your section 205-109B requires a Class C buffer, which is 30 feet wide. So we're proposing buffers that are less in width to that 30 feet, and I'll explain that in a minute. But again, keeping in mind the existing buffers along these property lines is 0 feet. There's no buffers. The self-storage containers, the storage containers and the fencing go right up to the property line there. The plants that are proposed here are selected from the township plant list. It's a dense evergreen landscape plan planted along these property lines, providing year-round green buffering. And additionally, we're proposing shrubs as well to enhance the landscaping, and in addition, a 6-foot privacy fence. I do want to note there's heavy landscaped areas that exist along the western property line within the adjacent Vendetti property. Those trees will remain. In fact, we have notes on the plan that indicate that those trees will remain and the limbs to those trees will remain as well, which is important as it relates to the adjacent property owners' concerns. And I'll talk about the landscape buffers and the variances in one moment. All right, so I'm going to refer back to our drawing 9B. So there's two categories of variances that are required for this development. There's variances to accommodate the proposed site improvements, namely the self-storage facility and the frontage improvements that we're proposing with that. And then there's the whole other category of existing nonconformities that we'd like to clean up for the record, put them on the record to explain those nonconformities that will remain with the land as a result of this project. So I'm going to walk through those. I'm going to reference them by ordinance section. Going through the...
Before you go on,
yeah.
The list is included as Exhibit 2B, if you haven't seen it.
We have it.
Okay?
Can you speak in the mic, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. The list of the variances and the special, and the non-conforming uses is included at Exhibit 2B.
We have it. Thank you. Okay, so again, I'm going to walk through first the new variances that are required to accommodate the new improvements. So Section 205-36 requires a use variance for the F4 mini warehouse use in a C commercial zoning district, and to also permit multiple uses on one lot. So the F4 use is not a permitted use in the C zoning district. It's actually an industrial use, the mini warehouse. But I would submit to you, in my opinion, generally speaking, that a self-storage facility at this location, on this property, is more of a commercial use, because that use will generally cater to the residential and commercial areas that are not only on the property, but in the general vicinity of the property. The residential uses are in very close proximity. In fact, they are immediately adjacent to the site, namely the apartment complex, and then there's other apartments and other single-family uses that are in the general area. If I look at section 205-9C of the ordinance, this is the land use policy. It says goals and objectives for commercial land uses within the C commercial district. And the goal is, the commercial land use goal is to encourage and strengthen a viable amount of various types of well-located, well-designed commercial developments with primary emphasis on safety, convenience, and attractiveness. The objectives are as follows: consolidation of older, declining commercial development into more clustered centers of high-intensity uses so as to reduce traffic hazards and enhance convenience. Number two, encouragement of the separation of commercial traffic from through traffic by controlling ingress and egress points and by requiring off-street parking and loading facilities. And number three, encouragement of the growth of those commercial uses which serve the community, with special emphasis on the conversion of buildings to office and professional service at the appropriate locations. So it's my opinion that this proposed development satisfies those goals and objectives of the land use policy. Again, it allows the zoning violation to be remedied. It allows the site to effectively get cleaned up. It allows the frontage of the site to get cleaned up. And it will support basically a nicer amenity on the site. Section 205-109B, this is a variance that's required to permit a 6.9-foot buffer yard where a minimum 30-foot buffer yard is required, and to provide the required buffer and shrub plantings for the western property line along both the northern and western property line. So let me explain that. We need where a commercial use abuts a residential use, a 30-foot buffer is required. We're proposing a 6.9-foot buffer along the western property line, that's to the top of the page. We're proposing a 19-foot buffer along the northern property line, again on the left side of the page.
Greg, I think the property line to the rear is the eastern property line.
I'm sorry, the eastern property line, thank you.
Okay.
Eastern property line to the top of the page, northern property line to the left of the page.
And in addition to that buffer, we also have a driveway that when you add the driveway to the buffer, we actually provide 30 foot of open, or undeveloped space, if you will.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the 7th Avenue right-of-way is this green space, this unapproved lot that, unapproved right-of-way that doesn't exist. So there's really a buffer, that 19-foot buffer is buffering green space. The effective buffer, as I like to call it, is when you add the right-of-way for 7th Avenue to this, the 19-foot buffer that we're providing on site, it's more than 30 feet to the apartment building. So the effective buffer, I would submit to you, is bigger than the 30 feet that's required. The 6.9-foot buffer to the north, again, that's buffering the Vendetti property, I'm sorry, to the east. There is no buffer today. The self-storage containers and the dilapidated fencing goes right up to the property line, so it's a better condition than there is today. But again, there are additional there's heavy trees, I would call them, heavily landscaping and mature trees on the other side of the property that exist there. And so the effective buffer is more than it is in today's condition. And on top of that, we are proposing a 6-foot-high privacy fence with the privacy slats in them. Section 205-16F for F. This is a variance that is requested to permit more than one office and a dwelling unit on the property. So one of the specific requirements of an F4 use is that only one office is allowed on the property. And of course, we have the office that's with the self-storage facility, but we also have the existing office that's to remain. And so we effectively are creating a variance situation by having two offices on the property, which, again, the existing office is in existing condition. The self-storage facility needs an office to operate. Similarly, section 205-16F4G, a variance is requested to permit multiple uses on a lot with the self-storage facility there. Again, another cleanup item. It has to do with more than one use on the property. Section 205-107.A, this variance is to permit impervious surfaces of 1.98 acres, where a maximum of 1.57 acres is permitted. This has to do with your site capacity calculations in the ordinance. When I go through the site capacity calculations, we're allowed 1.57 acres. We're proposing 1.98 acres. I will point out that it is an improvement over the existing conditions, which is 2.02 acres. We're slightly reducing the impervious coverage over the existing conditions. But nevertheless, it's a variance condition because of the site capacity calculations for this site. Section 205-118F, we need a variance to permit parking within the right-of-way. As I mentioned, we are removing the spaces that back out onto the right-of-way and that are partially located within the right-of-way. As a result of the proposed improvements, there are 4 spaces along the frontage that will partially remain within the right-of-way. But these spaces will not be accessed by Haynes Road. They can only be accessed internally to the site. And so obviously it's a safer condition. We will require an easement from Bristol Township to allow the spaces, which will be maintained by the applicant. But again, it's a variance because technically the spaces are considered off-site, even though a portion of them are on-site. Section 205-120, we need a variance to permit 55 parking spaces where a minimum of 78 spaces is required. Now, this has to do with the individual uses and their parking requirements. The ordinance requires the individual uses to be added up. So the parking required for the pharmacy has a certain number, for the restaurant a certain number, the office, et cetera. And by ordinance requirements, we have to add those individual uses together to arrive at the 78 parking spaces that are needed. We're proposing 55 parking spaces. But I would submit to you the following, that the number of parking spaces that's needed, actually needed, is far less than the 78. And it has to do with 2 concepts. One is the concept of shared parking, and the other is the concept of offsetting peaks. So shared parking is if I come to the site, I want to go to the pharmacy and then the restaurant, that's one trip. I don't need 2 parking spaces for the one trip. I park once, I walk to one place, walk to another, and then leave. And that could be the same for any of the uses that are on the property. The notion of off-peak parking is that, generally speaking, parking for the office or even for the self-storage facility will be different at a different time of day than parking for the restaurant. So if I park at the restaurant, that's usually in the evenings or on the weekends. Parking for the office is during the day, not on the weekends generally, and not in the evenings. So if I consider those 2 concepts, and I walk through looking at the top 3 users for parking, I want to submit the following. The single use with the largest parking demand is the restaurant. And your ordinance requires parking based on square footage. So for this restaurant, it requires 32 parking spaces. But the ordinance also offers an alternate method of calculation based on the number of seats. And if we use the number of seats to calculate the demand, we only need 19. And it's my understanding that the tenant of this restaurant spoke to the owner, Mr. Lee, who reported to me that the most parking they would ever need at the site would be 20 spaces at the most. So if we use that 20 spaces and we, again, apply that alternate parking, the parking requirement drops by 12 spaces. If I look at the second largest user based on demand, that's the pharmacy. And according to the calculations, the pharmacy would require 14 spaces. But again, knowing the tenant in speaking with Mr. Lee, who reported to me, the most parking that would be required would be 5 spaces based on their business. And again, if you use this 5 spaces, the requirement drops by another 9 spaces. And then on down the line, if we look at the office requirement requires 11, but Mr. Lee, who uses the office, only needs 5 spaces at the most. And so when we apply this concept of shared parking and offsetting peaks, we get a calculation of 52 parking spaces, which is the requirement, We're providing 55 parking spaces, which is more than what that calculation would require. And it's worth noting that the number of parking spaces for the self-storage facility is 10, and we're providing 10. So for that facility, we are meeting the requirement, but for the rest of the site, I would submit to you that we don't need as much as the ordinance would require, and we are providing the adequate number. Section 205, 130B, this is a variance to request a setback from the center line of the Delaware Canal for an industrial use. So again, the requirement is 150 feet. If I apply that special setback to the Delaware Canal, almost half of the site would not be developable. And of course, there's existing structures that are much closer to the center line of the canal. So we're proposing a 15.4-foot measurement based on existing conditions. That's the office building that's being converted to the self-storage facility. That will not change. I'll note that the existing storage containers are as close as 10 feet to the property line, and the closest self-storage building will be 74 feet from the property line. So we're improving the situation. We need a variance because of the Delaware Canal requirement. Section 205, 134B1, a variance is requested to permit a fence in the front yard. This is 2 locations. The first location is along that paper street that I mentioned before. So again, it's not physically there, but 7th Avenue is a frontage. There's a setback of 35 feet that's required. We're proposing the privacy fence for the self-storage facility, 18-foot setback from that right-of-way. And the other fence is the decorative fence. Again, we want to propose a decorative fence in the event that the applicant wants to build an outdoor patio for the restaurant. To give that option, that fence would be located on the property line and essentially have a 0-foot setback. We feel it's a nice amenity for the site in the event that the applicant wants to construct it.
So let me just ask a question. The application is for self-storage, but it sounds to me like you're trying to clean up every possible violation on the property, and not only that, go beyond that and expand existing, I'll call them non-conforming uses, for lack of a better term, so that you can have some optionality with those uses. So it seems like this application is much broader than a self-storage unit. Am I correct on that?
I would say that the self-storage project is creating a lot of these new variances, and we thought it would be relevant to clean up some of the existing nonconformities at the same time.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but you want to have potential to expand some of those uses like a patio or?
Just the patio is the option, that's it. The rest of the uses are going to remain.
So it's really, we're just trying to clean up the
Can you speak into
nonconformities.
the microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So what can you offer us in terms of hardship?
I was getting to that.
Why don't you get to that now?
For the record, do I need to review the rest of the variances, or
It's
they're in
black
the?
and white, we can read it.
All right.
I mean, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it seems like you're here for the application of the self-storage, which is fine, but you seem to be lumping all these other properties, it's the same property, same tax parcel, whatever. You're lumping all this stuff in with the parking spots and it's just like, doesn't seem kosher to me at this point. Do you know what I'm getting at? Like, it's like, no, your application says you're here for self-storage, now you're lumping in restaurants. You know, the applicants talk to the restaurant owner, and he only needs this many spots and this many spots, and it's.
It's triple hearsay, but that's okay.
Well, again, what we attempted to do was go beyond the self-storage, because there are issues with the rest of the property. And we could have gone and dug into the township files and got the history and asked to have those recognized as legal nonconformities based on the history. But rather than do that, since we were here, we felt that the best approach was to take some of those things, like those 6 parking spaces that are backing into the right-of-way, and fix that, okay? And the council agreed with that.
We don't know if those existing nonconformities really predate the zoning code, so I'm not sure how nonconforming they really are. But
No, and I understand that.
I think the point of it is there's really not a hardship argument here. It's a clean up the property argument and make it a better functioning property. That's really what you're asking the board to do.
Well,
correct?
there is a hardship in the fact that it's an existing property that's been there for many years that evolved. It just sort of grew organically, it evolved. The township never flagged it until September of 2020. So the hardship is that we have a property that, again, evolved over time, and we're now here with a client who purchased the property 8 years ago who has a zoning violation. So
I
we're just
understand.
trying to address all those issues that were created by the fact this property evolved, and some or all of the uses may not have actually come in and gotten formal approval. So we're just trying to legalize and clean up this property and address all the issues at once.
And some of these things are self-created along the way. Just
But
your
not
client bought
by
them-
our client, though, by prior users,
But he-
because
he
we're not
took-
proposing to change any
Bought
of
the
the.
property with knowledge of it, though, regardless. That's
Well,
okay. I just want to flush
okay.
out the substance of the application. The board is going to make its own decision. It's not my decision.
Okay, I got you.
All right, so having said that, the variance list is in the package, exhibit number 2. I'll just go to section 205, 186C2, A through E. In your zoning ordinance, this provides the standards and justification for the various relief. So section A states that the granting of the variance shall be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the chapter and shall not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. Sorry. You want me to repeat that? Yes. All right. Section A, that the granting of the variance shall be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of this chapter and shall not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. So in my opinion, as we discussed, the application, the approval of the variances will allow for a project that enhances the property. It will improve the neighborhood that's around it. It will clean up the unsightliness of the storage containers, the trash, the dilapidated fencing that is on the property. It will allow for greater buffers along the northern and eastern property lines than exist today, which are none.
But Mr. Elker, they're gonna have to do that regardless if we accept this application or not, correct? They're gonna have to clean that up regardless, am I correct? The self-storage, the containers and all, that has to be done. It has to be cleaned up regardless of what's going on here.
Right, and.
Because it's subject to a notice of violation.
Right.
You're right, and
Okay.
we're gonna clean it up, but again, there's,
Please use the mic, I'm sorry.
oh, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting that. Obviously, we're gonna have to clean it up, but that's an area of the property that's subject to some use. So we're proposing to use it consistent with the way it's been used for at least 18 years. Okay, so that's our approach, is to keep it as consistent as we can, not change the uses, but just make everything legal and improved as far as aesthetics. Again, we're putting fencing, security fencing, and also opaque fencing to add buffering. We're cleaning up the parking issue in the front. We're creating a single driveway. So we're taking all the issues and trying to rectify them and create a much higher quality property.
Sir, you'll get a chance to speak when they're done. All right, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Just some other things. It will allow for the frontage improvements, which I would submit to you are not required for the cleanup of the property, but something the applicant is willing to do with the self-storage facility. So that's sidewalks along the frontage, curbing, removal of the parking spaces that are within the right-of-way, alignment of the driveway with Junewood Drive, and all of which improve the aesthetics and the safety of the site.
And to go to your point, those are things we don't necessarily have to do. We're doing those, that's sort of the give back as far as in exchange for the relief we're looking for. So it improves that if we can get the approval for the rear.
Subsection B states that the granting of the variance will not permit the establishment within a zoning district of any use which is not permitted in that zoning district. Obviously, we need a use variance for the F4 mini warehouse use. It's not permitted. But as I stated, it's my opinion, based on this particular site and this proposed improvement, that self-storage facilities at this location are more of a commercial use, and because they generally cater to residential and commercial areas that are at or near the site. And again, it's my opinion that this project meets the goals of the land use policy section of the ordinance, which is section 205-9C, for commercial uses, along with the improvements that are proposed with the site. Section C states there must be proof of unique circumstances, that there are special circumstances or conditions applying to the land or building, which circumstances or conditions are peculiar to such land and do not apply generally to land or buildings in the neighborhood. So I would say to you that there are unique characteristics of the property. There are the storage containers, the junk and trash, the abandoned vehicles that are on the site. There are the existing multiple uses on the property that will remain with the property. There are the unique site conditions regarding the driveway alignments that I had mentioned before. There's the existing setbacks, the impervious coverage, and other nonconformities to the area and bulk requirements that exist today on the property that are unique to this property. Subsection D, there must be proof of unnecessary hardship. I would submit to you, that's my opinion, that I testified to that through my exhibits and my testimony. And then E, that the granting of the variance is necessary for the reasonable use of the land or building, and that the variance as granted by the zoning hearing board is the minimum variance that will accomplish this purpose. It is my opinion that the granting of the variance is necessary for the reasonable use of the property, and that it's the minimum variances that are needed to develop the property to accomplish this purpose.
Okay, that's all I have for,
Anybody have any questions?
You have someone,
Explain to me mini warehouse for what exactly will be stored? Is that going to be part of the self-storage, or is it going to be used for the people that run the self-storage?
It's essentially self-storage, so it'll be for residential storage, and it may be for commercial storage on a smaller scale, not to the scale that exists today, but essentially it's your traditional self-storage facility.
So none of the parking spots are going to be used to store boats, campers, RVs, none of that stuff?
That is correct. There's no outdoor storage that's being proposed.
Anybody else have any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think there was a question in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when you guys are done your presentation, then we'll get to ask questions.
Okay. All right, at this point, I'd like to call Joe Davidson. Good evening, Mr. Davidson.
Good evening.
You have been sworn, correct?
That is correct.
And who are you employed by?
I'm employed by Ignari Lummis Architects in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
And how long have you been employed there?
I've been employed there for 16 years.
And,
Ignari Lummis, it's IGNARRILUMMIS.
and did you provide us with a CV resume for this evening?
Yes, that was.
I've seen it. What's his testimony going to be based on?
On the architecture, he designed the
Okay,
buildings.
well, he's acceptable.
You accept him as an
Yep.
architect, okay. Okay, so Mr. Davidson, you did prepare the architectural plans this evening, correct?
Yes, our
Okay.
office prepared the plans.
Okay, could you go through and just describe for the board what we're proposing architecturally?
Yes. I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. What we were proposing is single-story drive-up self-storage facility buildings. They are non-conditioned buildings. What we would consider old traditional self-storage drive-up buildings. What we tried to do, and I know Greg had mentioned this, was part of this, it was driven by cleaning up the site, the existing storage containers. As part of the zoning ordinance, some of the things that we had to comply with was a maximum height of 12 feet, which we comply with on these buildings. They're shed buildings. The highest point of those sheds will be at 12 feet. The spacing between each building is 24 feet, which is a requirement of the ordinance, and they are, I think the maximum size is 4,750 square feet, which is under the maximum required size of 6,000 square feet from the ordinance. There are multiple buildings on the site, and I think Greg had mentioned these, buildings A through E, and the existing office building will be converted to the self-storage office. We are not adding to that building. We are just renovating that existing structure. So that will remain and will be renovated as part of this proposed redevelopment. In terms of the building, it's just metal-sided building. They're basically standard. You see them, and with some grays and blue materials for the self-storage facility. Again, I believe, in my professional opinion, that a self-storage facility is a low-impact use. It's not generating a lot of traffic. It's not generating a lot of noise. It's a nice buffer. We do a lot of self-storage facilities in this area and across the country, and they are often located near residential zones because that is where the customers that support them come from. And this is a nice buffer, I think, between the more commercial district as we move into the residential districts and the single-family homes and the apartments adjacent. So I believe that as a use, in terms of an in-between use, this is a good use for this site. And I believe that obviously cleaning up the existing condition of that site would definitely be a benefit to the community and the neighborhood. And I guess at this point, unless you have any other questions,
Just to confirm, you believe that this proposal is compatible with the existing neighborhood, correct?
I do. I believe we're.
Sorry, compatible with?
The existing neighborhood.
Yes, I mean, these are single-story drive-up units. It's a residential neighborhood. I think these fit the neighborhood in terms of the height and scale of the buildings.
And would you, do you believe it's a substantial improvement over what exists there currently?
I believe it is a substantial improvement, yes.
And if the variances if granted, do you believe that those would have any negative impact on the community?
I do not believe that this use is inconsistent with the current use going on the site, so I don't believe there's any negative impacts to this proposed facility on the neighborhood or community.
Okay, that's all I have.
All right, anybody have questions for Mr. Davison? Well, I do.
Yes.
Yeah, Colleen, you can go first.
I just have one quick question. You guys keep referencing the existing buildings. Are they also getting a facelift as well, or are they going to remain as is?
As part of our current scope of work, we are not addressing the existing buildings.
All right, so how many buildings are you putting on the site? Self-storage built.
The self-storage buildings, and I'm going to borrow the.
Why don't you go through the plans and the elevations a little bit further ahead?
I'm just going to go through our plans. This is SCH 201, which shows Building A and Building B.
What was that? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Proposed Building A and Building B. There are 5 storage buildings of various sizes being proposed to fit the site. And then there's the one existing building that's part of the storage facility, which is being converted to the office for the storage facilities. Again, these elevations are very consistent building to building. This is a very typical self-storage design. And like I said, the maximum height of the shed roofs, which is one here, will be 12 feet at the highest point for each building.
So how'd you come up with 5? Is it standard? Is it 5 buildings? How'd you come up with 5 instead of 4 or 3?
It was trying to meet the max, or be below the maximum requirement of the ordinance of 6,000 square feet, and fitting them on the site with the 24-foot drive aisles between every single one of them. It's just kind of how the building's laid out, and for us to meet all those requirements.
So if you put one less building on there, will you meet the buffer requirements of 30 feet instead of 6.9 feet?
No, we would not.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, continue.
All right. Right now, we have Exhibit SCH 202. This shows buildings C and D, which again are rectangular buildings of various square foot. The square footages are on the site plan. I can go through them if you'd like, or we can just kind
Not
of.
necessary.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's Exhibit 9B in your packet.
And again, these are just two of the buildings that are being proposed on the site plan with the same design as the other three. And lastly, I have Exhibit SCH 203. Again, this is the odd shaped, I guess we'll call it a step back building plan, and that is because the property line steps back and we are following the property line to maintain the drive aisles as well. And again, this just shows the existing building with the self-storage office in it at this point. And then with some cleanup on the facade to address it and change it over to a self-storage facility. Once again, the maximum height for all of these buildings would be 12 feet.
Thank you. Anybody from the board have any questions? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any more witnesses, Counselor?
No, that's all I have as far as witnesses.
Done with presentation at this time?
As far as presenting direct testimony, yeah.
Bob, anything to add? Okay. So at this time, we're going to ask people from the audience like to come up for or against this. And like I said again, we're not here to sling mud. So if you'd like to come up and speak for or against this application, please feel free. Sir, come on up. State your name for the record, please.
How you doing, council? My name's Tom Stanton.
Sorry, can you spell your last name, please?
Sure, it's Stanton.
Can you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
One question. Just your address for the record, please.
My address is 27 Prunewood Road in Plumridge.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's the address? Prunewood, you said?
27 Prunewood Road. It's Prunewood, one word,
Okay.
road
Okay, great.
in
I got you.
Plumridge. I'm just speaking out against this for one, I don't think the township needs any more storage facilities. I think the township needs more millage and money to come in, and you're definitely not gonna get it with storage units. We have storage units over here. If you wanted to clean up the area, the previous owners that got the tickets should have probably have cleaned that up, and you wouldn't be in the predicament that you're in now. What is the township gonna get as far as millage with your storage facility here?
That'll be up to the county. They'll come in after this, if this is approved, after it's done, and they'll reassess it based on the improvements. And then the millage, the taxes would be based on that new assessment and the township tax millage.
Maybe you guys came in here with like a bunch of hearsay. Oh, he said, she said, all this other stuff, and it's not legal. We have storage units like right across the street that aren't supposed to have boats and other stuff on their property, and they look all junked up. And I'm just, as a resident, I'd ask the township and the council to vote this down.
Thank you, Mr. Stan.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good evening. David Sowerbutts, Sowerbutts. I'm an attorney. I'm here tonight to represent the interests of the northern adjacent property owner, Mrs. Marion Vendetti, whose husband, Vincent Vendetti, founded the pharmacy that is on this site. She's lived in this property for, 60-something years, and is very familiar with the property, the history of the property. And she and I have carefully reviewed all the plans, and since she's right next door, she has a bird's eye view of what's been going on there up till today. First, I do have as an exhibit that I would ask to be put into the record a written signed authorization from Mrs. Vendetti for me to appear tonight on her behalf. She's in her 80s, she's really good, but getting around, moving around isn't as good as it used to be, and she asked me to come tonight to represent her interests. So if I may submit this. Thank you. I apologize, I forgot, I didn't bring 10 copies. It's okay. I'll try to keep my remarks short to get right to the point. She has no objections. This will be a substantial improvement for her and what she's been dealing with for many, many years, decades maybe. So there was this strange anomaly with both deeds, including this 11-foot strip on their deed, that the applicant has graciously agreed to just back away from and allow Mrs. Vendetti's deed to be superior and to keep that 11-foot strip. At the very back of her property, there's a chain link fence. That's going to remain. That's important to her. There are old growth trees all along this property line. We heard tonight from the applicant they're going to remain. That's very important to her because they shade her house and keep her electric bills in the summer way, way down. Obviously, her remarks are more personal. They're more in line with her needs for her property. She's not looking at a general world view of the whole township. Admittedly, I'm here tonight primarily to address her needs, her interest as the adjacent property owner. The new wooden fence, I don't even know what words to use. I've been out to the property numerous times. I'm familiar with the neighborhood. I'm familiar with the property. I grew up in Junewood, that's why. So the existing wooden fence is in a horrible state of repair. It's right up against the chain link fence, and because it's in a horrible state of repair, trash and debris gets in between the two fences. The existing property, trucks back up into the fence, push it, and park. That'll all be gone. That'll all be eliminated with this use. There'll be a distance between the chain link fence, the wooden fence, and the storage structures. The storage structures are not, in my client's view, a temporary use. If you're going to invest the time and the effort to build a storage facility, they're going to be there for a while, and they're going to be maintained. The whole property is going to be maintained better than it has been for a long, 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 long time, which is, again, purely self-interest for Ms. Vendetti. This is what she wants. This is what she wants. The property has evolved and grown into the creature that it is today. But, you know, in this environment, you got to have a lot going on if you're going to be able to afford to maintain a property, keep it looking good, and keep it up to date. I mean, can you have a store without an apartment above it in most commercial areas anymore? No, you need the apartments. You need the store together. So Mrs. Vendetti were here, this is what she would say, because I've met with her and I've spoken to her a number of times. The accommodation on the trees is greatly appreciated. They're going to leave them all, leave the chain link fence, improve the wooden fence, and this will be a substantial improvement in the management, the appearance, the cleanup, and it will be long-term because of the investment that's involved. So, again, her perspective only, her needs as the adjacent property owner. She supports the proposal, and I'm here tonight to express that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the audience? All right. So, what I need from the board is a motion to approve or deny this application.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I need a second.
I'll second.
Call the board, Mr. Secretary?
Colleen Dunn,
Yes.
Jim McMahon,
No.
Ed Murphy, yes.
You're approved.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Plus, we appreciate your attention.
Okay, next on the agenda is BCCI Levittown LLC, 4121 Oregon Pike, Brownstown, PA.
I have an amendment to make to my application. There you go. Good evening, everyone. Julie Von Spreckelson from the law firm of Eastburn and Gray here tonight on behalf of the applicant BCCI. I have an amendment to our application this evening, so I wanted to give you a little bit of background. I know the chair was not at the previous hearing in October, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. The applicant was before you on October 11th requesting two-dimensional variances from impervious coverage and from the second requirement, parking requirement, for the use F3. We presented two expert witnesses, a civil engineer and a traffic engineer. Mr. Beagle, through his attorney, stated his opposition to applicant's zoning application and cross-examined applicant's expert witnesses. The zoning hearing was then continued to tonight. So over the last 2 months, applicant and applicant's counsel diligently and repeatedly tried to resolve this issue with Mr. Beagle. And no, there's no objection. I'm allowed to amend my application. I'm allowed to explain why we're amending the application. We were unable to resolve his opposition, so we needed to move forward with an amended plan. And what our amended plan does is we withdraw our request for the impervious coverage variance. And how we have done that is we reduced the size of the building. It was 141,596 square feet. We reduced it to 125,000 square feet. And accordingly, the number of parking spaces was reduced to 89. Also, as you can see up on the revised plan, the second driveway access on Hardy Street near its intersection with Airport Road was eliminated. So applicants now prepared to proceed forward with the one remaining dimensional variance request for the second part of the use F3 parking requirement. And as a brief recap of what that variance request is, applicants' use F3 meets the parking requirement of one off-street parking space for each employee on the largest shift, plus one off-street parking space for each company vehicle normally stored on the premises, plus one off-street parking space for every 10 employees on the largest shift for visitor parking, which calculates to 55 required parking spaces, and applicants providing 89 parking spaces at the property. The second part of the zoning ordinance provision states that to ensure sufficient amount of parking can be provided if the use or tenancy changes, applicant must illustrate on the land development plan that there's sufficient area on site to accommodate the parking requirement based on one space for every 500 square feet of gross floor area. We seek an interpretation from the zoning hearing board that that provision is inapplicable since a use F3 is proposed and that parking requirement for use F3 has been met. We continue to assert that that zoning ordinance provision is illegal and unenforceable, as there is a specific ordinance parking requirement for use F3 and a zoning ordinance provision that requires an applicant to provide parking based on a different standard for a use that's not even being proposed is illegal and unenforceable. In the alternative, applicant is requesting a variance from that second requirement of the zoning ordinance. In addition, applicant would agree to a condition of approval if the zoning hearing board looked favorably upon applicant's amended zoning application. Applicant would agree to a condition of approval that if the use or tenancy changes from a use F3 and that use or tenancy is not able to meet the parking requirement of 1 parking space for every 500 square feet of gross floor area, that a variance from that provision would be required, therefore taking any possible impact out of the equation. We meet the F3 parking requirement. That's what we're providing here. If it changes in the future, a variance will be required. And that is the sum and substance of our amendment.
And if I may respond to that amendment, again, my name is Andrew. May I speak into the podium just so I can have the microphone? Good evening, Board. My name is Andrew Stahl. I do represent 2 folks who requested and obtained party status at the last hearing, parties right across the street. Now, with respect to the claim that, this project was before you for the first hearing in October, it's now 2 months later, not once. And despite council's representations that we've had continuous and constant communications, which is really not true, not once have I gotten anything relating to this zoning application being withdrawn or amended in any way. I see in the exhibit that council had handed up, there's a letter that apparently I'm CC'd on. I never received that. I will represent to you, this is the first time that council has told me that this application is being amended. It is now being materially amended. We have, over the last 2 months, to protect the due process rights of my client, who's a neighboring property owner who received notice of this application, prepared for this hearing based on what was submitted. We are now showing up. I walked up to the podium, asked to address the board, having counsel have already rested her case. She said, "Excuse me, I'm making an amendment to my application," and interjected everything you just heard. That goes against everything that's with respect to my client's due process rights to come in and present his case in opposition to the application. So with that, if they're going to make an amendment to the application, this hearing needs to be continued so that we can review the amendment, the new application, and then present our case consistent with that review. Because as it stands right now, we are prepared to present testimony and evidence in our case relative to the application that was before your board as of, I guess, 5 minutes ago.
Excuse me, if I may respond to that. There is no requirement that I provide anything to him before a zoning hearing, just like he has witnesses here who have reports prepared. He hasn't given them to me. I haven't seen them. I have no idea what he's going to present. He didn't tell me who he was going to present. We decided this basically at the last minute because we didn't have a choice. Mr. Beagle told my client that he is going to drag this out for 3 to 5
Objection.
years.
See, and this is exactly what we want. This is what council wants. This is what council wants, is to create this kind of
And he can get party
mess.
status, by the way. I still have the ability to.
Can you please jump in here, please?
Yeah. So, okay. All right. I just want to make it clear so that the board is clear. Your application has been amended to eliminate the need for a variance for impervious surface, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you need less of a variance on that second parking provision that may not even apply based on your legal argument because your building's now smaller.
It's the same variance request, yes.
Right, same variance request, but it's not as, it's.
It's the smaller building, that's correct.
Right, okay. So if you can explain how this prejudices you, since you don't have to defend a variance that she's not asking for, and she's asking for less of a variance, how are you legally prejudiced?
I'm prejudiced because, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Just real quick, you submitted the first set of plans to planning, correct? The planning board. You didn't go in front of the planning board for this application?
We were there before a rezoning, when we rezoned the property.
Okay.
We were before that.
Submitted, but that was toward.
Right, but I'm reducing the variances
Okay,
that are
but-
required. I'm making him happy because he asked for a smaller building.
But
so
did
he's
you
getting what he
did you resubmit this to planning, the new plans, or no?
We just amended tonight. We just amended
Right,
tonight.
so-
5 minutes
But
ago.
So they,
we're reducing the amount of variances
it
requested.
seems to me like this whole process, there's a whole process being skipped here.
Yes,
is what-
correct.
what I-
Exactly.
what I'm-
Exactly what I'm saying. I've never seen this, I've never seen this, and this is the first time where I've been.
That's not true. I amend my applications
I've been
all
handed,
the time.
if you can amend your application in certain ways, saying, here's a brand-new plan, and here's how we're proceeding, when I have witnesses that are going to testify about the application, and if we have been in constant communication, how come council not once told me, hey, I'm gonna amend my application, here's the common courtesy of the amendment?
Because we've been trying to work
We
this
have
out
not,
with
we
you,
have
and
not,
we
and the
have been
board's,
unable to,
Julie,
we
this is
didn't
the,
have a
this is,
sorry.
Well, if we were in constant
it's all right, yeah, it's all right, this is,
Second, I cannot
This
take
is-
everybody down. One at a time, please.
it has to be continued, and it has to be, give us a fair chance, and I'm
The
Mr.
same
Fetterman.
variance is being requested, we just removed
With
one.
a brand-new
We made our-
plan, a
our-
brand-new plan. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt like has been done to me.
Yeah, now, it's a brand-new plan, so it's a different, it's totally different than what was submitted before. It changed, so now, I mean, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong here, isn't there a process that has to, or can they just resubmit plans and lower, and change the square footage of a building, and then just come to us and change the variances?
The township should review it before it's submitted.
Exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, council, it's up to you.
All I'm asking for is a fair shot. If there's going to be amendment, that's all my guy wants is due process, that's all.
So,
I hate to interject, but she's given you what you asked for at the last meeting.
Thank you.
At the last meeting, no, this is not what we asked for at the
You
last
asked for a
meeting.
smaller building and less
No,
parking.
that's not, so it's not what we asked for at the last meeting. I haven't even put on testimony with respect to what we're asking for. We're asking for compliance with the ordinances.
And we
That's what
are.
we're asking.
And we are.
That's,
Well, you just heard the director of L&I. He basically said that you got to resubmit these plans to the township before you can just change them. That's not the way it works. I mean, it's that simple.
All due respect, I do disagree because I've been practicing zoning for 30 years. And I know that I am permitted to amend my plan. If I was asking for additional variances, yes, then you're right. It would have to be re-advertised, it'd have to be resubmitted. But when you reduce the amount of variances or zoning relief that you need, you are allowed to do that at any time. You are allowed to withdraw your zoning relief at any time. We've asked for one variance, the same variance we asked for last time, except we reduced it by one.
Through a brand-new plan,
What do
and
you
after,
ask about
and
the
through a
plan? It's
brand-new
all
plan,
about
and through
parking.
2 months, through 2 months that I've sat having my witnesses being prepared.
So what I want to say is, on the issue of prejudice, I don't agree with you as a legal matter, because she's removed the variance. As far as the procedure goes in the township, that's not my position to speak to. If the L&I director says you need to submit that plan first before it can come to zoning, that's not something I can tell you. That's his department. As far as the prejudice, I don't agree with it. I don't think you're being prejudiced at all. I just think you want to do what you said you're going to do, which is to try to defeat this application.
I never said I was gonna try and defeat the application. I never said that.
Well, when you say you wanted to come in compliance with the zoning ordinance and the applications for a variance, effectively you're saying you want to defeat the application because you wanted to comply. And she's making a legal argument that that second paragraph of the parking provision doesn't apply to this case. That's a legal matter to be briefed. You can appeal it, she can appeal it, you can do whatever you want. As far as I'm concerned, as solicitor, I agree with her that she can remove a variance if she wants to. As far as the technical procedural steps that need to be taken before she can get access to the zoning board, I'm not speaking to that at the moment.
Okay. I understand. So just so I'm clear then, well, what is the board's take on the next steps for this application now? Because the way I understand it would have to be resubmitted if I understood what was said. And I just want to know if there's going to be a subsequent hearing.
Well, here's the thing.
I,
Yeah, Ken, I'm sorry.
no, I was gonna say,
Procedure if there is, because
yeah, I've never known, you can always come in front of the zoning board. If you apply to L&I and you get denied, you can come in front of the zoning board. You don't necessarily have to go to township council first.
That is correct.
I mean, that I don't agree with, but you're saying in this township, that's how they do it?
Or you're amending, correct?
I'm eliminating one variance. The other variance is the same. I need a variance from that second parking provision in that use of.
So you're lessening the variance.
Exactly.
Right.
And
If you increased it, you'd have to re-advertise and resubmit. That's a public notice issue.
I apologize. I just wanted to say, and we agreed to a condition of approval that basically eliminates the variance. It eliminates it.
it bears emphasis that the provision, there's two ordinances, and I didn't think I would be up here discussing this, but there's two ordinances. I've now, like I said, been given a brand-new plan. The size of the building has gone up and down, and I'm not saying that to be difficult. I'm saying that because the parking provision specifically says that it goes off of the size of the building. So now I'm given a brand-new plan and now saying, well, this parking works under this configuration. I haven't even reviewed yet, and I've spent 2 months preparing for the application before me, and now, like I said, I've now just gotten this dropped on my doorstep when I have witnesses ready to prepare to testify about another application.
A use F3
I
has a
understand,
different
and
provision.
all
Do
I
you
want to do,
understand that?
counsel,
And it agrees.
All right, let's take a break, please.
Can we please have a break?
5 minutes.
Jim, if I may weigh in on that, I misunderstood what Ms. Freckelstein was presenting for the board. If she's not changing the use but lessening it, then no, we would not have to do that.
Okay.
And as long as Ken Federman's okay with that, then yes. Yes.
Well, I am okay with it.
All right. So, you still need a break?
I don't know.
We can take a break.
No.
It's up to you.
I don't need a break. You want to talk?
Well, you asked for a break.
No, I didn't ask.
Oh, okay. All right, so,
Oh, no, I was just saying, take a break,
stop.
stop talking over one another. Wrong break.
All right. All right, so, I guess going forward, you can try to present your case.
So, yeah, and just so it's very clear, I have just been, and even council has admitted, I have just been given 3 brand-new exhibits, and I have just been given a brand-new plan, and this has been 2 months, and I understand that you're ready to object to this. So you objected all last hearing, but what I'm going to say is it's unfair to my client to have to come up here having had 2 months to prepare for an application, and this is not a immaterial change to a plan. This is not a, hey, we're complying with this setback. Hey, we're making the building in compliance with a height requirement. This is a brand-new plan that I now have to call my witnesses on and ask them to testify after I've spent 2 months preparing them for an application that is brand new.
He keeps saying he's going to be prejudiced, but he didn't give me his report.
And you didn't give me your reports. I didn't get any reports going into the first hearing.
That's what zoning is. It's trial by fire, unfortunately. But he didn't
Thank
give
you.
me his reports either, so that I could review them before I have to
So
cross-examine them.
if the board would like to move forward, as long as it's completely clear on the record that what we're going to be presenting is the application that we received initially.
All right, well, obviously, it's clear for the record. So, I mean, at this point, I think you should, the feeling up here, because I can sense the feeling that, they want you to continue.
Okay, I am going to present to the best of my abilities my client's position.
This board is not going to give you continuance right now. I
I
can tell
don't
you
want-
that right now.
I
It's
just
not
want a
gonna
fair shot,
happen.
that's all.
There's no way possible it's going to
Yeah,
happen.
I just wanted a fair shot. So with that, I'll call my first witness.
Well, if you would let me finish.
If I can just call my first witness, I mean, this is going to be all night.
I
This
presented
is,
an exhibit booklet. I just want to say what the exhibits are, and we amended.
and I will
parking.
say that they did rest their case, and I have the transcript. They did rest their case when we closed the last hearing. So now
took
we're
it on
adding
rebuttal.
additional exhibits, and a rebuttal goes in after we present our case. So,
It's irrelevant.
Can you just, look, we went through this last time with you. You're a very good advocate, but you have to go in a direction the board wants to go in terms of procedure. This is not a trial. It's similar to one, but it's not exactly the same. So the standards here are not quite the same. There's nothing wrong if she wants to come in and amend an application and ask for less variances.
that's
I
fine.
mean, that's just zoning law.
That's fine.
So
I'll call my first witness and we'll move
if you
forward.
think you have an appealable issue, then you can appeal it.
Absolutely, that's fair.
Go ahead, let her finish, please.
You can have a seat while she finishes.
Sure.
Do you want to take your?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did hand out an exhibit booklet. Tab 10 is the letter dated December 13th, 2021 to the zoning hearing board amending the zoning application. Tab 11 is the rendered and non-rendered revised zoning plans prepared by Bowler Engineering dated December 13th, 2021, which would be in place of the prior zoning plan. That was tab 6 of the exhibit booklet. And tab 12 is the revised parking study prepared by Traffic Planning and Design, Inc., dated December 13th, 2021. And with regard to that revised parking study, I do have Matt Hammond here who prepared the parking study, and I would just ask him to state the differences in the parking study that he had prepared previously, which was tab 9 of the exhibit booklet, I believe. So I would just have him present that.
If, again, I don't want to be difficult, but we're just reopening their testimony now. So I understand rebuttal, but this isn't rebuttal. This is, I'm going to just redo it.
It's not redoing it, it's amending it.
Please
It's
sit down.
amending it.
Thank you.
Matt, please.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Matt, based on the parking, and based on the background I provided and the revisions made to the zoning plan, did you amend your parking study?
Yes, I did.
And is that study tab 12, part 2 of the exhibit booklet?
I believe it is, yes.
And can you please explain the revisions made to the parking study dated October 7th, 2021, which was tab 9 of the exhibit booklet?
Sure, there's exhibit, I'm sorry, A9?
It was tab 9 of the, yeah, prior exhibit.
In regards to the updated parking study, there were a few minor changes that were included in the study. Most of them revolved around the fact that the building size has been reduced from 141,000 square feet to 125,000 square feet. The fact that there's less parking spaces actually proposed on the site as there were before. And also, when looking at the second provision of the ordinance, where it talks about the retenancy or reuse of the building, we looked at how many parking spaces could be converted for the 10 trailer stalls that are provided on site. Actually, vehicular parking spaces could be provided there in lieu of those 10 trailer stalls. But the bulk of the study, the bulk of the analysis that was previously completed remains, as does my conclusions and opinions.
And can you run through briefly just the changes made?
Sure. The only changes, again, relate to the retenancy of the building. We meet the first provision of the parking, which states that 55 parking spaces are required, whereas 89 parking spaces are being provided. But when looking at by right uses of the property, there are approximately 13 by right uses, and only 4 of them do not meet one part of the parking provisions. Those are, as I mentioned before, the D10 athletic use, the F1 manufacturing use, the F5 printing use, as well as the F2 research and development use. And again, the number of parking spaces that would be required for those 4 uses, again, is very similar to what was previously provided for, but for the fact that there's the building has been reduced by approximately 16,000 square feet. So in conclusion, those 4 uses if they were to re-tenant the building, would be required to seek variances from the zoning hearing board in order to accommodate for the parking proposed on site.
And Matt, at the previous zoning hearing, you testified that in your professional opinion as an expert in transportation engineering, planning, design, and parking, that the second part of the zoning ordinance parking requirement for a use F3 requiring one space for every 500 square feet of gross floor area is unreasonable as it relates to the actual parking demand for the proposed use. Does that remain your opinion?
Yes, it does.
And at the previous zoning hearing, you testified that in your professional opinion as an expert in transportation engineering, planning, design, and parking, that providing less than one parking space for every 500 square feet of gross floor area for the proposed use and the other permitted uses in the M2 district does not in any way adversely impact and is not detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the community. Does that remain your opinion today?
Yes, it does.
That's all I have of this witness.
Okay, you did a traffic study?
So we, as part of land development, there will be a traffic study that's will be completed and submitted as part of land development. As purposes of this evening in the zoning hearing board, we've completed the parking analysis, which I believe you mentioned you weren't at the last hearing. There was an analysis that was done that went through the various provisions of the ordinance as it relates to the site from a parking perspective.
So no, you didn't do a traffic survey?
A traffic study has been, done, has been submitted to the township for review, has been submitted to the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation as it relates to Route 13 access. But that will be refined and continue to be included in land development.
It's a permitted use, so we will present that, though, in land development.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? All right, you're close your testimony?
Yes.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
I do have some brief cross-exam. Mr. Hammond, I know we asked a couple of questions at the last hearing. Part of your expertise is planning projects in compliance with parking requirements and ordinances?
Correct.
And you'd agree with me that you try and comply with on-site parking requirements, because if you don't, then you have to park on the street, correct?
Well, yes, that's one option. There's obviously other options that involve congestion on site and things of that nature, but yes.
Right, and if you're parking on the street, then you'd agree with me that would presumably adversely affect nearby property owners, right?
That's correct.
And with the section of the ordinance that you're seeking a variance from, you'd agree with me that it's all based on the size of the building, right?
Correct.
So you could actually just reduce the size of the building, comply with that ordinance, correct?
You could, yes, you could comply with it, with that section of the ordinance if you reduce the building to such a size that may not be usable or may not be viable for that type of use. What I would also point out is that the four uses that I had mentioned.
I'm going to talk about the applicant's use.
The four uses that I had mentioned that would require variances, those uses would require variances even if we were to meet that second provision of the ordinance. And what I mean by that is that the second provision of ordinance requires that you provide one parking space for 500 square feet. But for instance, use F2, research and development, requires you provide one parking space for every 250 square feet. So we may meet the ordinance with respect to retenancy. That use would still need a variance because they would not meet the requirements of one space for 250 square feet. That's also similar for the, I believe it's the manufacturing use, the printing use, and the athletic facility use is actually one parking space per 150 square feet. So again, would also require variance.
And you're in F3, right?
Correct.
Which is one parking space for every 500 square feet, correct?
It is one parking space per employee plus one parking space for any
500 square feet of gross floor area, correct?
It's one parking space for each employee on the largest shift, plus one parking space for each company vehicle normally stored on the premises, plus one parking space for every 10 employees on the largest shift for visitor parking. That is the first provision.
How about the second provision?
To get there. The applicant must illustrate on the land development plan that there is sufficient area on site to accommodate the parking requirement based on one space for every 500 square feet of gross floor area. This is to ensure that a sufficient amount of parking can be provided if the use or tenancy changes.
And you'd agree with me from a parking and traffic perspective, it's because we don't want to overdevelop a site and then leave underdeveloped parking, because if the tenancy changes, then you have less parking than necessary, correct?
So, to be honest,
Is that-
I don't understand the second provision of the
That's fair.
ordinance, is because it's very difficult to try to determine the amount of parking that would be needed for some future use.
Yeah,
There are many other uses that could come in to the site and re-tenant the site based on a special exception, based on conditional use, based on a use variance, or many other uses that could come on site. So whether or not it is a F3 use or is a F5 use or whatever it is, it's very difficult to try to determine all of the different scenarios that could be provided.
Right, but regardless, as a traffic engineer and an expert in parking, you want to make sure that you're reducing any spillover parking and keeping it on site, right? Which is why we have on-site parking requirements, right?
Correct, and to that point, one of the important aspects, and unfortunately, a lot of municipal ordinances, when it comes to parking requirements, are very antiquated. For instance, office, a lot of ordinances require 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Whereas the reality of the situation, it's more of the 3 to 3.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet is actually what's utilized. So when I look at parking, when I look at a various site, obviously I take the ordinance into account, but I also look at other means and methods of determining the actual reality, the parking demand of that various use. And one of those that is very common in my industry is the Institute of Transportation Engineers, where they've compiled data from various uses, and they determine what the rates are for those various uses to determine what the parking demand should be for those various uses versus a very general requirement in an ordinance. If you look through the township's ordinance, there are many, many uses that have exactly the same parking requirements, regardless of the use. So to me, that's more general, whereas utilizing industry information or actual counts gives you a better sense of how much parking you need. And if you take that into account on this site, I would tell you that the ITE says we almost need exactly the same amount of parking spaces as the first provision of the ordinance says.
I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Matt, if you could, I just wanted to clarify. So the use F3 meets the parking requirement of the ordinance, correct?
First provision of the ordinance, correct.
Right, and the second provision is only if the use or tenancy changes, correct?
Correct.
And if an applicant would agree to come back for a variance if the use or tenancy changes, then there would be absolutely zero impact from that variance request, correct?
Correct.
That's all I have.
Just briefly, so are you telling me that every applicant now, because of the building that the applicant's building, has to come back for a variance for parking? Is that what the situation we're leaving the township in?
I believe the question was asked of me is if the applicant would agree that if the use or tenancy changes,
Right.
then they require that user or tenant to come into the township and prove to them that they meet the parking requirements, or in the alternative, request a variance.
So so I just want to make sure I understand. The applicant is saying that any future user who's not in this room tonight, the applicant's agreeing that they would have to come in and get a variance, right?
I think it's any user beyond an F3 user.
No further questions. I got it.
All right. Counsel, you have witnesses or no?
I do, yes.
Well, let's do this.
Call Brian Seidel.
All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break, please. What's that? What's that? No, no, I watched it on TV. Yeah, no. He's trying to advocate, he's an advocate for his client, so he's trying to do the best he can, so. but- Yeah. I mean, they're gonna, there's homeless people living there. I mean, I don't know if you're gonna technically change that, but the hotel part of it, yeah, that's a shit show. Well, I think there's a proposal, they're building another warehouse where the other hotel is, from what I was told. The one up the street from.
Yeah, that's really pretty.
The other way, towards. Come on, counsel, come on up. Bring your witnesses up, swear them in.
You could swear them all at one time if you'd like.
Absolutely.
Mr. Beal, you stand up real quick.
Stand up, Tim? Sure. You sure?
Sure.
Because I got standing, right?
That's all right. So
I
you
don't
can,
know. You tell me.
you can swear, I'm sorry.
Oh, don't worry, you will, honey.
Call me honey.
Yes, I did.
I appreciate that.
Please swear them.
Appreciate you and your tone.
All right,
all right.
that's enough. Please.
We shouldn't even be up here.
We
all right.
shouldn't
Shouldn't
even
be
be,
hearing this.
all right,
We just swear our guys in.
please.
Can you raise your right hands, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to
I'd like to call Brian Seidel, and if I can, just hand up an exhibit binder. I thought I gave you one, I apologize. Ms. Freckleson. Here it is.
Listen, I ain't gonna put up with you two. I can tell you that right now. I don't care who you are. So you guys both better settle down.
Good evening, Mr. Seidel. Can you please say your name for the record?
Sure. For the record, name is Brian Seidel. Last name is Seidel.
And what is your occupation?
I am a land planner and landscape architect.
And can you briefly describe your educational background?
Sure. I hold a Bachelor of Science from Temple University in landscape architecture. I've been working in the field of land use planning, land development consulting since 1997. Licensed as a landscape architect in Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and Maryland. I'm also certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners. I've testified in front of numerous boards and commissions similar to this throughout several states.
And where are you currently employed, and what is your title?
Employed at Site Planning Design and president of that firm.
I'm satisfied with this. I'm satisfied with this. Good.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
My question was going to be, where are you currently employed, and what is your title?
Site Planning and Design and president of that firm.
And Mr. Solicitor, I'm going to offer him ultimately as an expert in the field of land planning.
He's acceptable to the board.
And Mr. Seidel, is exhibit tab 4, is that a true and correct copy of your CV, just to clarify?
It is, yes.
And are you familiar with the subject property?
I am.
Okay, are you familiar with the uses, roadways, properties in the area surrounding the subject property?
I am.
And have you reviewed all the exhibits submitted by the applicant in this case, both those previously and the ones we received just shortly ago?
I did receive the previous application documents. I had very limited time to review the new application documents that were just presented this evening.
Okay, and did you prepare for tonight's hearing based on the previous application that was submitted?
That's correct.
Okay, and did you attend the prior hearing and listen to all the applicant's testimony at that hearing?
I did.
Okay, what's the current zoning of the property?
It is the M2 Heavy Manufacturing District.
And was the property rezoned to M2?
It was.
And do you recall when that was?
I believe it was August of this year.
Okay, and what was the zoning prior to August of 2021?
Commercial.
Okay, and what's the existing use on the property, to your knowledge?
Hotel.
Is a hotel permitted in the commercial zoning district?
It is.
And
It's irrelevant. This is all irrelevant testimony. I'm not sure
Keep going.
Thank you.
Let's get through this.
And as it stands with the rezoning, is it a existing non-conforming use under the zoning ordinance?
The existing use is now a non-conforming use, correct?
And have you reviewed the Bristol Township zoning ordinance?
I have.
Okay, and what are the other uses permitted in the M2 district?
I'm going to object. This is all irrelevant. We have one variance, and that's for parking.
Let's try to stay focused. They're all listed in the ordinance. We know what the uses are. To have you repeat what's in the ordinance isn't going to get us anywhere, so what's the point?
Have you performed an investigation as to what permitted uses will be permissible and feasible on the property?
Yes.
Okay, and are you aware that the applicant is proposing to demolish all the existing buildings and other structures on the property?
Correct.
Okay, does that, in your opinion, assist and aid in the feasibility of those uses on the property?
The removal of those existing structures, yes, would be necessary to facilitate development, the development that's proposed with the application.
And you're aware that the applicant is proposing an F3 cold storage facility?
I'm aware the applicant, yes, I'm aware it's a cold storage facility as it's been described. The F3 use, just to clarify, does not specifically, is identified as a cold storage facility.
Are you familiar with the F3 uses identified in the zoning ordinance?
Yes, the F3 uses are warehousing, wholesale sales storage.
Okay, and are you familiar with how net buildable site area is calculated?
Correct. The site capacity calculations and net site area, yes.
Okay, and what's important for calculating net buildable site area?
So for the net buildable site area, there's a number of factors that go into that. It's the overall size of the property, it's excluding right-of-way areas, it's excluding environmental features within the site, the natural resource areas that result in the net buildable site area.
And have you performed a net buildable site area calculation for the property that's the subject of this application?
Generally, we have. We reviewed the plans that were submitted by the applicant, and we identified a few deficiencies within those site area calculations.
Do you take exception to the categorization of the use as an F3 use? Simple question.
It's described as an F3 use. The plans identify it as a distribution facility. It is labeled on the applicant's plans as a distribution facility. Distribution facility is not identified as or discussed in the F3 use. It's only discussed in two other uses, fuel storage and, sorry, I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but distribution is not specifically identified in the F3 use.
So what, are you expressing an opinion that it's not an F3 use, what they're proposing?
It's unclear to me.
Okay.
If I may, I'm a little bit confused, because if we would have to get a use variance, then we would have to come back. We're not asking for a use variance.
I know that.
We're only asking for a parking variance.
Just trying to understand.
I just want to ask the questions, yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I'm trying to understand what you're getting at so that we can.
Listen, this is the case he's prepared, and you guys resubmitted the plans, and this is the case he's presenting at this time. So you got to give him a little leeway on it, because this is what he's been planning on using. So believe me, I understand. But what he's trying to do here is change the mind of some of the board members, and this is the case he's presenting, because you guys resubmitted the plans. So continue.
And if I may, to answer the question, the distribution term is identified in the F1 manufacturing use and the F9 fuel storage and distribution use.
Okay. And in your review of the net buildable site area for this property, what did you ultimately come up with the calculation of net buildable site area?
The net buildable site area that's shown on the applicant plan is actually higher than what we calculated. There are several features that are not accounted for in the applicant's plans. Specifically, the first one that comes to mind is the right-of-way of Airport Road. The comprehensive plan for the township identifies that Airport Road is an 80-foot wide right-of-way. There are development plans that we have reviewed that have recently been approved by the township that also identify an 80-foot right-of-way on that roadway. That's not accounted for within these plans. The reduction of that site capacity or the reduction of that area impacts the site capacity calculations, which is what the impervious cover is based upon.
If I can, Mr. Seidel, can you please turn to the exhibit that I have at tab 5?
Yes.
And is this a document, a plan titled Analysis of Zoning Plan dated December 8th, prepared by your office?
Yes, it is.
And to be clear, was this the plan that was submitted with the application?
This is the original plan. Basically, the underlying plan is the plan.
Council, we know that's not the same plan, okay? We don't have to keep rehashing this, do we? I mean,
Understood. Can you explain what Exhibit 5 shows?
Sure. Basically, what we've identified is color-coded areas that we found deficiencies in the plan. The red area along Airport Road is the additional right-of-way of that roadway that has not been accounted for. The plan does also, in these capacity calculations, does not account for a wetland margin area, which is pretty substantial and what is shown in a yellow color. The reduction of that, or the inclusion of that wetland margin, substantially reduces the capacity and buildable area of the property. In addition to that, we also identified a few other areas of inconsistencies. The green area to the left is the 100-foot residential setback from residential uses. The plans show that from the actual building, or appear to reference that from the building, where it should be referenced from the property line of the residential area. And does not include the additional 150-foot canal setback area that we were identifying along Bristol Pike. Their plans do identify a canal area basically north of the canal, but it stops. It doesn't show the extension of the canal closer to Bristol Pike. And then we're also showing the Route 13 setback area and the some paving parking that's proposed within that area. Those last three features don't necessarily impact the base area site calculations, but they are encroaching on other areas of the township regulations and creating additional variances.
And you're aware that the applicant was requesting two variances, one with respect to impervious and one with respect to parking?
That's correct.
And you'd agree with me that the parking variance is in a way related to the size of the building, which is in a way related to the size of the impervious, correct?
That's correct.
Were you able to prepare a plan that fully complied with both the impervious and the parking requirements that the applicant is seeking relief from?
We did.
And is that, can you please turn to the tab that's Exhibit 6? And and for the record, Exhibit 6, is that a plan titled Compliant Plan dated December 8th, 2021, prepared by your office?
It is.
And can you please explain what it shows?
Basically, what we did for this plan is keep a general layout of the applicant's plan, but we reduced the area and we accounted for the additional areas in the base area site capacity calculations. We increased the setback from the residential area. We accounted for the additional right-of-way of Airport Road. We accounted for the buffers from the canal and the wetland margin areas, and we basically developed a plan that would comply with the parking numbers, loading, and building coverage, and impervious coverage in that area, which would result in a building of roughly 75,500 square feet.
And to be clear, does that plan comply with all the other requirements that you previously testified to?
We believe it does, yes.
And to be clear, does that plan comply with the impervious surface coverage requirement that the applicant was initially seeking a variance from?
Yes.
And does this plan also comply with the parking requirement that the applicant is seeking a variance from?
I believe it does, yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the requirements for a variance under the township's zoning ordinance?
Yes.
And that's with respect to hardship, not created by the applicant, minimum relief necessary, all of those requirements?
That's correct.
In your professional opinion, has the applicant met those requirements?
No, I don't believe they have not.
And why not?
There's no specific hardship for this application. In fact, the engineer's testimony, the applicant's engineer's testimony indicated, and I believe it was cross-examination, that this was the building size and the site plan designed by or desired by the applicant. And that's what this is. It is their desire. It is not a hardship that's creating this. There are environmental features on the property. However, you can see from the sketch, development of a 75,000 square foot, or in this case, 75,500 square foot warehouse is still fairly substantial. It's certainly some element of development that is potential on this property.
And in the plan, the compliant plan that you just testified about, that is for 75,000 square feet, give or take, correct?
Correct.
And the plan that was initially submitted, I believe, was for 140,000 square feet, correct?
Yes.
And a plan that we were handed tonight, that was, I think it's 125,000 square feet, is that correct?
I'm not even sure. I don't recall.
Okay. If it was there, in reviewing documents relating to the rezoning, are you aware if the applicant submitted a sketch plan for this project?
During the course of the rezoning?
Yes.
They had.
It's absolutely relevant.
I don't disagree with you.
Thank you. Exhibit 7, is that the sketch plan that was submitted by the applicant, and it's from Bowler Engineering?
That is the sketch plan. To my knowledge, this is the sketch plan that was submitted as part of the rezoning, dated 6/2.
2021?
I'm sorry, I'm checking the date. Yes, 6/2/2021.
And just so it's clear, at the right side of the plan, it says, quote, tentative sketch plan, and it has the parcel number, and it says for BCCI Levittown LLC. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that's the applicant here tonight, correct?
Correct.
And Bowler Engineering was the engineer that testified for the applicant, correct?
Correct.
And this sketch plan, you'd agree with me, is showing a building of 108,000 square feet, correct?
That's correct.
Are you familiar, or Mr. Seidel, have you performed an investigation as to other cold storage facilities and the size of those buildings where they are operated?
Generally, yes.
And can you please explain the results of your investigation?
Sure. There was testimony given at the hearing that this was the applicant's proposed size of the facility is what was needed for this type of use. We did a search of real estate listings for sale, for lease, availabilities in the area, some of which have been leased up, and we quickly found 4 examples that we provided here ranging between 25 and 75,000 square feet in size for a cold storage facility.
And in your professional opinion, is 75,000 square feet more than sufficient for a cold storage facility?
I'm sure it may not be appropriate for every user, but it is certainly a viable size for a cold storage facility, yes.
And did you prepare a planning report with respect to all the testimony you provided here tonight?
I have.
And is that in tab 8 of the binder I provided you?
It is.
And you had talked about other cold storage facilities on other sites. Are there documents in your planning report showing those other cold storage facilities?
There are, yes.
And can you please explain, is it the back of the exhibit?
Yes, refer to it as the appendices, but yes, the end of the report contains a few examples.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
I just had a couple.
Go ahead.
Mr. Seidel, the applicant withdrew their request for a variance for impervious coverage. You're aware of that, correct?
Based on your testimony or your presentation this evening?
Based on the plan that was presented this evening for 125,000 square feet. You're aware of that, correct? Are you aware they withdrew the variance?
The plans that were presented in the brief review that I've had, I did notice that the site capacity area calculations have not changed. So the impervious coverage that is listed on your plan, on the applicant's plan, excuse me, would still require a variance.
And if that's true, if it's true that there was some issue with the plan or something was wrong with the plan and an impervious coverage variance was needed, an applicant went to land development, say they went to land development, would they not have to go back to the zoning hearing board and then request a variance?
If it were determined that a variance were needed at that point, yes.
Right, so they can't circumvent that. If we need a variance for impervious coverage, we have to come back before this board, correct? No matter what.
Correct.
Okay. And then you talked about that there's no unique physical conditions on this property, but yet there's a canal, there's woodlands, there's wetlands. Isn't that correct? About how many acres is that of resource protected area?
I don't have that specific area.
If I said it was over 2 acres of resource protected area that's undevelopable on this property, would you agree that's probably accurate?
Yes, maybe.
And how much additional impervious surface could you put on on this property if you were able to not net out the resource protected area?
Without the numbers exactly, I can't say.
You could certainly fit all parking spaces, correct? The total number of parking spaces required if this property wasn't burdened with those unique physical conditions, correct?
If it did not have the environmental conditions that are specifically identified in the provisions of the zoning ordinance as being appropriate to preserve, yes.
Right, but they are unique physical conditions. Would you agree with me?
I would not say they are unique.
You wouldn't say that a canal, woodlands, and wetlands are not unique physical conditions of a property? Is that your testimony?
I don't think they are specifically unique in this area. They encompass the corner or a small area of this property. There's still a large, very large developable area of this property.
So 2.5 acres you're saying is a small area? That's all I have.
I just have very few redirect. You were asked about resource protected area. Mr. Seidel, are you aware that the property is roughly 9.5 acres in size?
Yes.
And the resource protected area, I think you were at the last hearing, did you hear testimony that there's about 2.5 acres of resource protected area?
I believe that was just represented, yes.
Yeah, so 9.5 minus the 2.5, so 7.5 acres of according to the applicant at least, unresource protected area, which would be buildable, correct?
Correct.
And in your professional opinion, is even 7 acres sufficient for the use that the applicant is proposing?
Yes.
And in your professional opinion, is even 7 acres sufficient room to comply with the ordinance requirements?
I believe it is, yes.
I have no
And
further
I'd,
questions.
and I'd also like to point out, under the township statement of community goals and objectives, under the land use policy, policy number 7 is the only one that specifically says the protection of environmentally sensitive areas and remaining open space is a primary goal. This is the only objective that is listed as a primary goal of the Bristol Township Comprehensive Plan. The plan formally designates environmentally sensitive areas with the intent of limiting developers to respect this critical resource.
So whether it's 125 square feet or 140 square feet or 75,000 square feet, it has to be protected. That land has to be protected.
It does. And the area that needs to be protected is not represented on the applicant's plans.
All right, thank you.
And to be clear, the compliant plan that we had as Exhibit 6, that respects all the resource protected area, correct?
I believe it does, yes.
Any questions for Mr. Seidel? No. Next witness.
Call David Horner. Mr. Solicitor, I'm going to be going through qualifications to have Mr. Horner admitted as an expert in the field of transportation, engineering, planning, design, and parking. I'm happy to go through the qualifications.
You don't have to.
Thank you. Mr. Horner, Exhibit 9 in that green binder, is that a copy of your CV?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And have you had an opportunity to review the transcript from the last hearing?
I have.
And have you had an opportunity to review the applicant's plans with respect to, that were submitted before and tonight?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and you're familiar with the application, what the applicant's proposing?
Yes.
Okay, and you're familiar with parking, correct? What they're proposing with respect to parking?
Correct.
And are you familiar with section 205-120A52 of the ordinance, the variance that they're seeking?
I am.
And there's essentially two requirements in that variance, or in that ordinance, correct?
There is.
Okay, can you please just describe your understanding of the first requirement?
Yes, the first requirement essentially states that it's required to provide, I believe it's 1 parking space per number of employees on the highest shift, plus I believe it's 1 additional space per every 10 employees to accommodate visitors, resulting, I believe, in a total of about 55 or so.
And then with respect to the second requirement, you'd agree with me that that is linked up to the gross floor area of a building, correct?
It is.
And it's 500 square feet. It's 1 parking space for every 500 square feet, correct?
That's correct.
And then in the ordinance, it says, this is to ensure that a sufficient amount of parking can be provided if the use or tenancy changes. You're aware of that?
Yes.
And do you have an expert opinion with respect to the reasonableness of that ordinance and why it's there?
I do, and I think the reason it's there, and Mr. Hammond did reference that a lot of ordinances are antiquated. I would actually agree with him, a lot of ordinances are.
Yes.
Because what he's doing is he's giving an opinion on what the ordinance means. He's taking it out of the legislative intent of the township. It's the legislative intent of the township that governs, not Mr. Horner's opinion of it.
So, Mr.
noted. Go ahead.
I just wanted to put it on the record.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. So as I was saying, I think this ordinance section is actually quite progressive, refreshing to see actually, because what's happening with the warehouse industry over several years, it is changing. A warehouse use, they're not all created equal. And I think what this ordinance section is looking towards is the fact that a warehouse user can come in, require, and I think it makes sense, at a minimum paved parking spaces to accommodate the current employee shifts, but it's recognizing the fact that that user or another tenant could come in and change their operation to be a much more employee-concentrated use. Warehousing uses all over the area, especially lately, that have a very intense demand for employees. So the concern here, and that the ordinance addresses, is not that the parking has to be constructed currently. I think the first part of the ordinance requires that. But there is enough land to accommodate that, because those changes can happen, and I don't believe they would have to come back to the zoning board if it's this tenant changing their operation internally without changing the building footprint or such that. So that, I think that's the reason for the requirement, and I think it's appropriate.
Okay. And with respect to, in your professional opinion, is that requirement reasonable with respect to what the applicant is proposing?
I think it's a reasonable requirement to put on an applicant, yes.
And I want to talk about the variance. You looked at the variances from the initial application, correct?
That's correct.
And there were about 200, were you able to perform a calculation with respect to the variances that they were initially seeking versus what they're seeking through their amended application tonight?
Yes.
And can you please describe what you found?
Yes, as I understand it, the application that was the subject of the hearing 2 months ago had 151 spaces proposed, and it required, per the ordinance requirement, of 283 spaces. So it was 132 spaces short of the required. The current plan, as I understand it, proposes 89 spaces, requires 250 based on the 125,000 square foot building size, which is actually 161 short of the requirement. So actually the variance, while it's still a variance, it's actually increased in terms of the amount of variance needed.
And do you have a concern that if the site, including the one at issue tonight, is not properly developed with respect to parking, there might be spillover parking somewhere else?
Well, that's the concern. And I think that's what the ordinance anticipated, to make sure that if there is a need for that additional parking, it can be provided on site.
And that somewhere else, if there's insufficient parking, could go on adjacent streets. Do you agree with that?
I do. It could.
And to your knowledge, is Mr. Beagle and his company is located right across the street from the subject property?
On Airport Road, yes.
In your professional opinion, could a lack of parking on site adversely affect Mr. Beagle's property?
It could. It could result in parking on Airport Road, and that's the concern.
I have no further questions. Counsel?
Mr. Horner, you stated that it's an appropriate standard, even though it's not the use that's being proposed. Is that correct? So a use F3 is being proposed, and that standard is the one you talked about, one space for every employee, correct? And, right?
As I understand the ordinance, the F3 ordinance requires room, not necessarily constructed, but room for parking for one space per 500 square feet. That's the requirement for F3.
No, well, I think you might want to reread the ordinance, because that's not the ordinance requirement. The ordinance requirement is one space, let me see, make sure I say it exactly right. One off-street parking space for each employee on the largest shift, plus one off-street parking space for each company vehicle normally stored on the premises, plus one off-street parking space for every 10 employees on the largest shift for visitor parking. That's the requirement for a use F3.
That's part of it. It's a full paragraph that included just part of the
But
requirement.
the second part states that if the use or tenancy changes, so what they're saying is that if it's no longer a use F3, then you need to show that you can meet the 1 per 500 requirement, correct?
I don't believe it says if the use changes. It simply says in order to make sure that if the use or tenancy changes, that we have the proper parking. I take that to mean not use in the sense that it changes off of F3. But I think that's clear that if it changes off of F3, you're in a different category anyway. I think it's referring to the operation, and or if a tenant changes, and therefore a different possible operation. I think that's what it's referring to cover the changes in the warehouse operations that can happen over time.
So if the applicant agreed to a condition of approval that, since they meet the F3 requirement, the first part of it, that if the use or tenancy changes, that a variance would be required, that would no longer be an issue then. Is that correct? There would be no impact from that if applicant agreed to that condition of approval.
I don't agree with that, and the reason I don't is because this tenant, and I don't know the exact operation of this tenant's warehouse needs, but if this tenant's warehouse needs or operation changes, a different way to make widgets or different way to store widgets, different employee levels, I don't believe there's anything in the ordinance that requires them to come back and ask for additional parking, because the use hasn't changed off of F3, nor has the tenancy changes. So I think the ordinance provides protection for the case of parking needs changing over time within an F3.
But applicant has stated in their testimony today that there's going to be 55 parking spaces that are required. So if anything would change that would not meet that 55 spaces, they would have to come back in anyway, right? Because then their application would have changed. And we all know that the zoning hearing board usually puts a condition of approval that it has to be in accordance with the testimony presented. So they would still have to come back to the zoning hearing board to obtain a variance. Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure that's the case, but I know that the concern would be if they came back and it was demonstrated that they now needed 200 spaces. At that point, it's already been that the building's already built, the parking lot's built, 200 spaces are needed, then what?
So they would have to find another use that complied, right? If they were going to be denied by the zoning hearing board, if they couldn't meet their burden to show a hardship, they would be denied, and they'd have to find another use.
Yeah, I don't know if the mechanism is there. If this tenant changes its warehouse needs, and do they have to come back to the zoning board? I don't know that they do.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then, because the other permitted use is there. For example, Mr. Hammond said that a use F5 printing is permitted in this zoning district. So a use F5 requires one off-street parking space for every 250 square feet of gross floor area. So they couldn't meet that, correct? They would have to come back to the zoning hearing board and get a variance.
If this became an F5 use, I believe they would, yes.
Correct. And if it became a D10 use, there's a similar requirement. They would have to come back to the zoning hearing board, correct?
I believe that's correct.
But for a use F3, they meet the requirement of the ordinance based on the one off-street parking space for each employee on the largest shift.
That I don't agree with, because the ordinance section for F3, that paragraph in F3 doesn't link to all the uses and say, by the way, for every use in here, let's have a factor of safety. It's specific to the F3. I think that's part and parcel of the ordinance requirement.
Well, it also says that the applicant must illustrate on the land development plan. So they could go to land development and illustrate that they comply with the ordinance. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I guess that would be correct. If the land development plan shows that they can comply to what would now be 250 spaces.
But that's only if the use or tenancy would change.
I don't see it that way. I think it has to be shown on the plan currently, even if it's just grass, not paved, that it meets the ordinance requirement without a variance. I think that's what it means. That's how I interpret it.
That's all I have.
Just very, very brief. Mr. Horner, you've been involved in land development projects, zoning projects, all projects relating to parking, traffic, things of that nature, correct?
I have.
Is it normal, reasonable, or customary in your experience to plan a project subject to someone else down the line getting a variance for the property?
No, it's not customary.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Horner from the board? All right, counsel. Next witness, please.
Call John Beagle. Mr. Beagle, can you please state your name for the record?
Jonathan Beagle.
And can you, that green binder is on the desk. I just want to ask you a couple questions about that.
Sure.
Are you familiar with the entity J&L Real Properties LLC?
Yeah.
J&L, J as in Jessica, N as in Nancy, L as in Larry, Real Properties LLC? And do they own a property located, the property is the subject of this application?
Yes.
And what is the address of that property?
6401 Airport Road.
And in the exhibit binder I provided you, tab 1, is that a deed to that property?
Yes.
Okay, and what's your relationship with J&L Real Properties LLC?
I'm the owner.
Okay, and does J&L Real Properties LLC lease that property to Effluent Retrieval Incorporated?
It does.
Okay, and exhibit 2, or tab 2, is that the lease of J&L Real Property LLC to Effluent Retrieval Incorporated?
Yes.
Okay, and what's your relationship to Effluent Retrieval?
I own.
Okay. And did you receive a notice of this application for the first hearing?
I did.
Is that tab 3?
Yes,
And at the bottom of tab 3, is that your signature?
yes,
And it says Jonathan Beagle,
yes,
6401 Airport Road. Do you see that?
yes.
Okay, and just for the record, Exhibit 8, 1, 2, and 3 were handed up at the last hearing.
So noted. So
sir-
noted.
Sir, approximately how far is your property from the applicant's property?
39 feet.
Has the applicant, before and after submission of this application, contacted you to discuss how this application would affect your ownership of the property?
Several times.
Okay. And you're familiar with the applicant's proposing?
I am.
And do you have concerns that the applicant's relief, if authorized, will impact your property?
Yes,
And that's with respect to the impervious coverage requirement?
yes,
Okay, do you have concerns about the building being too big?
yes,
Okay, and that would be, to your understanding, is that to the impervious that they were initially seeking?
yes.
Okay, and do you have, can you generally explain the parking conditions, on-street parking conditions on Airport Road?
There is no on-street parking on Airport Road.
Okay, do you have a concern that if there is overflow parking from another site, that may adversely affect your property?
Certainly.
Okay, and your testimony today, or tonight, does that relate both to J&L Real Property LLC's ownership of the property and Effluent Retrieval Incorporated's tenancy of the property?
Yes, both.
Okay, I have no further questions.
I would ask the board's indulgence a little bit for this cross-examination. It's important to protect the record, if I may. Mr. Beagle, your company website states that your company, quote, provides industrial and environmental services, is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation, and provides high-pressure cleaning service to vehicle and heavy equipment fleets. Is that correct?
At another location, we don't provide 24 hours out of the Airport Road location.
What's the hours of operation then at Airport Road?
I would say we're usually in there by 6 a.m., usually out of there by 4:30, 5 o'clock.
Okay, and with regard to your industrial business, due to insufficient parking on your property, you directed your employees to park on the street or at the property subject to the zoning application. Isn't that correct?
No,
Really? So your business, without permission of the property owner, used the hotel parking lot. Isn't that correct?
no,
Do you not have a lawsuit against you, a civil lawsuit from one of your employees who fell on the hotel property because he was getting into your van that transports your employee? I believe his name is Gerald Froschler. Because he's saying that he's aggrieved by the parking issue. And what we're saying is that there is no parking issue because we meet the requirement of the ordinance. And we're not going to park on the street. We'd agree to a condition of approval. You can't park on the street anyway. His credibility on the parking issue, that's exactly correct. And why he's aggrieved. He wants this property. He would like to purchase this property.
I think we can see where this is going, but.
Do you know Mr. Gary Lightman?
Counsel, how can you prove that he wants to, do you have any,
Yes, I do, actually, as a matter of fact.
is it in,
It's right here. Do you know a Mr. Gary Lightman?
was it submitted to us?
No, I was going to do it now. I have to question him first before I can do
think you should have done
that.
first before you started.
And it
in your
wasn't.
I
testimony.
have to lay a
It
foundation.
wasn't in the packet that I received of additional exhibits. I'm
doesn't-
just seeing
it
where this is
doesn't
going.
matter.
He's just gonna try and slander
doesn't
Mr. Beagle
matter.
and his business.
I am not trying to do that. I'm asking a question about his concern about the
This-
property.
Just for the record, I've just been received another exhibit for the first time tonight.
And I just received your exhibits for the first time tonight.
Let's just move on. You made your point, right?
Mr. Gary Lightman, he wants proof of this issue. Mr. Gary Lightman, he's your attorney, correct? He's one of your attorneys.
one of my attorneys.
Okay, and did you and Mr. Gary Lightman receive a letter of no trespass from the owner of the hotel?
Not to my knowledge.
You didn't see?
I'd like to see it.
Certainly.
Sure.
Certainly.
Just goes to the parking issue, that's all.
I'm not sure how. It's a letter of no trespass, don't come on our property.
If you would read in the third page of the attachment,
just note my objection for the record. That's all I ask, that we're just.
It's
trying to
so noted.
Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't see any indication that this was mailed to us or Gary Lightman, so you can have this back.
Okay, so you didn't receive it, so you're
I've never
telling me
se-
that you did not?
Ma'am, if you would let me finish, I've never seen that document before.
Okay, that's fine. And so are you telling me that what's stated in this document, that you and Mr. Lightman went to the property and threatened them and to sell or rent the property? It's in the document. It's in the document.
It's a hearsay document.
Okay,
I'm only going to allow so much of it. There's no one here to really back it up.
Okay,
He said he never read it. He said he
Okay.
never saw it. It
Okay.
is what it is.
that's fine. Did you offer the hotel owner $50,000 to purchase the property?
You would have to ask Mr. Lightman that.
No, did you? I'm asking you. Did you?
I never made any offer to,
I'm asking him I'm just asking a question.
How does this go to hardship? How does this go to anything with respect to?
Let's move on.
Did you tell the applicant that you would do anything in your power to stop the plan and will exhaust every area of appeal?
Same objection.
Yeah. Is the applicant here?
Applicant's here?
Yeah. Does he want to testify to that?
If he wants to testify, if you would like him to. I'm trying not to prolong it, but I'm just trying to set up my,
No, the applicant can testify. The applicant.
I'm just trying to preserve the record
Listen,
on appeal.
with all
That's
due
I'm
respect,
trying
I understand your point. The board gets your point.
to- Okay.
You're trying to show it's an issue with credibility. You think he has other motivations?
Regardless if he
That's
wanted to buy the property or not, the property's sold, correct?
It's under agreement, so it would be tortious interference of a
Right,
business
so-
relation. Correct.
All right, so that's that, okay? Go ahead, crossing, whatever you do.
There's no, if the, thankfully, I have no redirect. I would, if the board has no questions for Mr. Beagle, I would move all of my exhibits in the green binder 1 through 9 into evidence, and I would rest.
They're all in.
Thank
All
you
right,
very much.
Any questions for Mr. Beagle? Okay. All right, so you're done. Done. You're done.
Yes.
You're done. Correct?
Move my exhibits into evidence and just reiterate the conditions of approval that we would agree to if the board looked favorably on that.
Got it.
All right, so here we go. Was there any, the last meeting, was there any people from the,
I don't think we got to that point, no.
Never got that far.
okay. Bob, anything to add to this? Thank you. Okay. Here we go. Anybody from the audience like to come up for or against this application? Come on up, sir, please.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Kevin Hodges. Not sure where to start. This has been a little overwhelming.
Should be sitting up here.
I had things prepared here, and clearly this whole drawing change is made a lot of difference here. So maybe you'll just allow me a little leeway to address the board and give you my concerns. I received a letter because I own property directly in close proximity to the hotel. Actually, my wife and I own the property. If I may, again, just have some leeway to give you a brief history. Benchmark Construction reached out to me because they knew I owned that property. I personally met with representatives from Benchmark Construction. Prior to it coming to the council, these plans have changed substantially from my initial meeting with Benchmark. I expressed my concerns, as I did to the board, in probably a long-winded email because I couldn't attend the last meeting. Not only do I have a property directly related to the hotel, my 93-year-old mother has property directly related to the hotel, where my sister resides. It was informed at that particular meeting, and I noted that in my email, that it was presented to the Planning Commission that it was a totally industrial area. That's not true. Anybody who's familiar with that area knows there's a lot of residents in that area. I own property there. My mother and my sister still reside there. So now that these plans have changed, some of my presentation is going to be different, but I can give you a history if you don't mind. When I spoke with Benchmark and they indicated that they were interested in working with the community, the residents, the business, the plan that I originally went to Benchmark with, that they originally presented to the Planning Commission, I told them my concerns about all of the above. It came in as just being warehousing for the most part, with the assumption, and again, this is an assumption, that everything in that general area usually shuts down at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. The ink hadn't even dried on the approval, and the next thing, the building grew by 35 or 40,000 square feet. It went from 1 shift to 3 shifts. It went from warehousing to cold food storage, air conditioning units running 24/7. It affects my property greatly. I'm not a big fan of discussing my personal life in a public forum, but I think you need to know this, and at least I can touch base on it a little bit. This is an investment for my wife and I. We put our life savings in this property to use it as an investment property and then later on retire there. It met our needs. I have a small business very close to where the property's at. When I get to the retirement point, my sons will most likely take that business over and reside, so if Dad wants to come over and keep an eye on it, I can. It's within walking distance. It's within walking distance of where my mother lives right now, and my sister will live when the day the good Lord takes my mom. This is a huge impact, not only for my property, for my mom's property, and for that entire area. It came in, and the council deserves better than this. There's been so much deception here. One plan comes in, then it changes. One use comes in, then it changes. It devalues my property. It certainly devalues my mother's property. It completely derails my wife and my plans for retirement. I don't want to live across the street from something that runs 24/7 with refrigeration units running around the clock, and it's substantially bigger than what it was originally proposed for. And I'll close with this. When my wife and I bought that property, it was across the street from the Ramada Inn. Anybody who's been in the township for a long time knows the Ramada Inn was a very well-respected hotel. Property was meticulously maintained, was cleaned, it was taken care of, had a well-respected restaurant. We assumed that it was going to pretty much stay the same there, or if something else came in, it would still be compliant. This is completely different. And I'm hoping you guys will put a stop to this and let everybody just back up and reconsider the neighborhood, the residents, my wife and my property, my mother's property, and certainly the businesses that it's going to affect. I can't even begin to start looking at this plan now because the other plans have completely changed. So I hope, as a resident of the township, being blessed to be a small business in this township for 42+ years, I hope that this board will take into consideration the existing surrounding people that this is going to affect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else from the audience? Okay, well, here we go. I'm going to need a motion from the board for or against this project.
I'll make a motion for.
I need a second.
I'll second.
All right, call the board, Mr. Secretary.
Jim McMahon?
No.
Colleen Dunn?
Yes.
Ed Murphy? Yes.
Thank you very much for your time this evening.
All right, here we go. Next, Thomas Schneider, 130 Elmwood Avenue, Feasterville, Trevose, PA, requesting variance of Chapter 205-11, 205-23, 205-108, so forth and so on.
Good evening. My name is Brendan Callahan from Begley, Carlin, and Mandio. Before I get started this evening, I have the certification of service. It also has proof of posting on the last bit of that. Thank you. So the property at issue here is tax map parcel 052482, located at 3321 Ford Road. It's a residential property currently owned by Thomas Snyder, who's the applicant. in the matter. The lot is approximately 9,375 square feet and is located in the R1 residential district. We're before the board this evening to request a variance from 3 sections of the code. Section 205.11 to permit impervious surface ratio to be calculated on the base site area. Section 205-108B to permit the floodplain disturbance, and from Section 205-23E1 to permit the extension of the existing building frontage along the same front yard setback. So obviously, these dimensions we're requesting this evening are these variances are dimensional in nature, and the property currently features a single-family detached dwelling. My client's proposal is to level that single-family detached dwelling and use a portion of the current foundation to develop and build another single-family detached dwelling. Currently, the property is converted into an office and is in a state of disrepair. And Mr. Snyder is not proposing that the new structure be placed closer to the front yard or the setback, but rather the structure is being extended. And it should also be noted that the current structure is non-conforming, so it's in the front yard setback. And we're requesting that the extension of the new site area be approved because it will have more frontage in the front yard. I have with me tonight John Richardson from Dumac Engineering to discuss the matter a bit further. And why don't we swear you both in right now? Have this stand up, please.
Raise your right hands, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. So, Mr. Richardson, you heard what I described. Could you just give a very brief summary of the project and what's proposed here today?
Absolutely. The property is got an existing, it looks like it was a house at one time, but it's currently being used or was used as an office. It approximately is this area here. The proposal is to extend along the plane of the front of the house in both directions with a new dwelling that would be located there. In order to do this, we've identified 2 variances that are based off of floodplain soils. It's my understanding the township is looking at perhaps even eliminating the floodplain soil part of the ordinances, but as of now, they still are standing. The first one would be to, as of now, they're still standing. The first one is to permit the disturbance of the floodplain soils. It was and is a existing lot that's already been developed. Presumably, it's been previously was maintained as a single-family lot. So the first would be to allow disturbance of the floodplain soils. The second part is a variance from the definitions. The definitions require impervious surface ratio based off the net lot area, which does not include any of the floodplain soils or other natural resources that have to be protected. So by definition, it's mathematically impossible to calculate a impervious surface ratio for this lot because the lot area would be 0, so you'd be dividing by 0. So we're asking to permit the impervious surface ratio to be based off of the lot area, not the net lot area. And as previously discussed, the third variance is for the front yard setback, where we're extending along the plane of the front of the existing building. In fact, the plan is to reuse the foundations along the front wall, but we are extending it, and that was identified by the township engineer as the need for a variance.
And I did get a little ahead of myself. Mr. Richardson, could you just, you're currently an engineer at Dumac Engineering, correct?
Correct.
And how long have you been there?
We're familiar with it.
Just offer him as an expert in engineering. Mr. Richardson, is your opinion that this property is unique in nature based on the fact of the floodplain disturbance soils you just spoke of?
I would say so. It's 100% floodplain soils, and the floodplain soils have already been disturbed as part of the original development and maintenance and modifications.
So if we were required to abide by that code ordinance, you couldn't build anything on that property, correct? Okay. And have you been out to the site yourself?
I have.
Okay. And you're familiar with the surrounding properties?
I am. It's a residential house of similar nature to the one that Mr. Snyder's proposing to the side. And across the street is a similar type behind it's mostly open space, and to the right's open space.
So, in your professional opinion, do you believe that this variance would disturb the character of the neighborhood in any way?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, and do you believe that this the requested variances are the minimal variances required to afford the relief and make the least modification possible to the ordinance?
I do.
Do you have any questions?
So we don't have an impervious surface number, is that what you're telling me, right?
So the variance that we're requesting will allow us to calculate based off of the lot area, not the net buildable lot area. The net buildable lot area is
By
zero.
definition, it's,
Because of the floodplain.
yeah,
Yeah.
by definition.
Well, not the floodplain, the floodplain soils.
Soils.
We're not located in a floodplain.
Oh, okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions? Bob? Ken? Anybody in the audience? Okay, let me hear.
I do have one
Okay,
quick
Colleen.
question. On the information you provided,
Mhm.
and maybe this may need to be corrected at the county level, it has that property listed as a governmental authority, not incurring any taxes. Is that still
I didn't know that.
going on there?
To be honest, I was unaware of that issue.
We bought it from Rob's Towing, I know that.
Again, if you look at the owner history, you know, it was owned by the Redevelopment Authority from 2000, authority for approximately, I guess, one day in 2019.
One day.
So again, this could be at the county level, but that should be corrected.
Understood. We can make a condition of approval that you look into that and make sure that that's remedied.
All right, anybody else?
I heard that.
Bob, good? All right. So I need a motion from the board. For or against this project?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I need a second.
I'll second.
Call the board, Mr. Chair, Mr. Secretary.
Jim McMahon.
Yes.
Colleen Dunn.
Yes.
Ed Murphy, yes.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Have a great evening.
Okay, moving right along. Aerial signs and awnings incorporated, 2333 Conrad Road, Chester Township, Pennsylvania.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Andrew Stoll for the applicant. I appreciate everyone's time, and I'll try and be as efficient as I can. Andrew Stoll for the applicant. The applicant is Aerial Signs and Awnings. They're the authorized applicant. The property is located at 2671 Durham Road. It's actually owned by an entity known as Americo Real Estate Company. That entity is essentially it's a parent entity of U-Haul. So the property in question is the existing U-Haul self-storage facility located there. Now, the applicant, Aerial Signs and Awnings, actually does a lot of the sign work. So they'll go through, and U-Haul basically works hand in glove with them to say, okay, well, here's this property, how is it, where is it located, what kind of signage would be, acceptable, what can we push for, things like that. The property is zoned C commercial. It's located right next to, and actually parts of it looks like it's underneath I-95 and 76. Like I said, it's used as a U-Haul self-storage facility. It's improved with a large existing building, which is the facility. The lot itself is very large. So what we're proposing is one illuminated sign box, which will read U-Haul Center in the rear northeast portion of the property, which I'll present testimony through the applicant tonight. One non-illuminated wall sign reading drive-in self-storage. The construction of what we're calling an architectural wall feature, which is, we're saying, and I'll get to in a second, it's not necessarily a sign, but it's something that just goes up the building. So it almost looks like you're raising like a storage door. So I'll get to that in a second. Then we're also looking for faux storage doors, which is fake storage doors, which just, they look like they're storage doors, but they're not. So that leads me to the relief we're requesting. It's in three forms. The first is an interpretation that those faux storage doors do not constitute a, quote, sign as defined in section 205, 155 of the zoning ordinance, mostly because there's no words, logos, anything like that on it. The second is a variance of section 205-165A2A, and I apologize, I'll slow down, of the ordinance to exceed the permitted total area of all building signs. The ordinance requirement with respect to total signage in the C commercial district speaks to the lesser of 100 square feet or 15%. It's totally silent on how big the property is, how big the building is. It's totally silent on, well, if a property like ours is located next to the 76 or 95 where cars are going quicker and we're kind of tucked away. So that kind of goes to the hardship you'll hear about. And lastly, an interpretation that the sign to be placed in the proposed architectural wall feature I was talking about is not considered a, quote, roof sign, or in the alternative, a variance to that section, to section 205-161H of the ordinance to allow two, quote, roof signs to be installed. What the zoning ordinance contemplates when it defines roof signs is like you see a billboard on top of a building. This is not a roof sign under the definition, so hence our interpretation, or in the alternative, a variance. With respect, just so it's clear for the record, the exhibits I've handed up, the first is the application package. So that has our enclosure letter, the actual application and appeal to the zoning hearing board, the original application that was submitted to the code enforcement officer, who I understand has since retired. The fourth is the code enforcement officer's decision or rejection letter dated October 15th, 2021. 5 is the deed to the property, which you'll see is owned by Americo. 6 is the specifications of the proposed signage. And that's all within Exhibit 1. And tab 2 is our neighbor notices, which I included. Also, there's photographs of the posting. The third tab is the owner's authorization letter, which was submitted to the township as well, authorizing the applicant to file this application. The fourth is an aerial of the property. And then the fifth is the photographs of the property and the existing signage. 6 is photographs of the, quote, illuminated sign box. 7 is the illuminated, the non-illuminated wall sign. 8 is photographs of the architectural wall feature, and 9 are photographs of the faux door. And with that, I'd like to call my first witness, and I will, like I said, be as efficient as I can. Do you want to swear him in? Or?
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes. Good evening, sir. Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Chris Denston with Aerial Signs and Awnings.
Okay. And what is your occupation?
A project manager.
Okay. And what are your duties and responsibilities in that position?
Oversee projects from beginning to end, through permitting all the way through completion installation. From permitting all the way through completion installation of the signage.
And what types of projects does Aerial Sign and Awnings work with?
We have a lot of large commercial accounts, U-Haul being one of them, some other commercial projects. Wawa's a big customer for us, Rita's Corporation. Commercial signage and awnings is what we do. Oh, I'm sorry.
And how long have you been with the applicant?
I've been with Aerial Signs for 6 years.
And were you at another sign company prior to that?
Prior to that, I was with another sign company for 8 years.
Okay. And were you doing similar work at that company?
Same work, yes.
Okay. And you said you do have experience in the design of signs for commercial storage?
Yes, we do several projects for U-Haul, large projects. In Philadelphia, we've done some large projects. Variances were required for those as well.
Okay, and just generally, can you explain Aerial's relationship with U-Haul?
We're a sign vendor for U-Haul. We're not the only sign vendor, but we are a sign vendor for them, primarily in the Northeast region. But we design, build, and install signs for them.
Are you the point person for going and assessing the sign, designing it, getting any necessary relief?
Yes, I work directly with the U-Haul representative.
And do you have experience testifying before zoning hearing boards with respect to signage and sign regulations?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and with that, I would ask Mr. Chairman to recognize Mr. Denston as an expert in the field of sign planning and design.
So moved.
And sir, are you familiar with the subject property?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the area surrounding the property?
Yes.
Okay, if you turn to tab 4. And on tab 4, can you generally describe the property and the surrounding area?
Yes. What you see here is an overhead view of the property that's highlighted in blue. You see the building, the facility itself is the darker tan color area, which you can see the ramp for 76 and 95. The turnpike all cross around behind the back of that building. The north side is the rear of that building.
And those tan-looking rings around, is that I-95 and I-76?
Yes, correct.
Okay. An exhibit, if you turn to tab 5, is Exhibit 5, does that include photographs of the building and the existing signage?
Yes.
And can you please, using those photographs, generally explain the layout of the property?
Yes, so this is a progression of photographs from the rear of the property, and this is the subject area of what we're seeking a variance for. This is moving from the west side to the east side, I'm sorry, from east to west of the property, going through the pictures. So this is the rear of the building. What you see to the right on that first photograph is that taller wall. That is the first wall where we're proposing for these architectural wall features and signage.
And just generally, if you approaching a project, if it's U-Haul or somebody else, ask you to define what the appropriate signage would be, what's that process look like? And what factors do you consider?
Well, we're going to look at the size of the building, generally what the code's going to allow. In this case, it's a little bit different, but we're going to look at the size of the facility. We're going to look at the surrounding areas, the roads that go by there. This has 76 and 95, which are high rate of travel roads. So that's going to affect the signage. If you go too small, people won't have enough time to see it before they pass by it. So that's a factor that goes into it. Also, the location of where we're going to place the signs. What's the best visibility for the customer to get their name out there and advertise what the business is on that property.
Okay. Can you please describe just generally the signage that the applicant's proposing through this application?
Yes, so they're proposing 3 illuminated wall signs and 3 non-illuminated wall signs to go on 3 elevations of the rear of that property facing 76 and 95. If you go through to the second, third, as you start to see in that third photograph, you can see on the right-hand side of that photograph is actually the ramp for 95 going to 276. So you can see that roadway is elevated up above the building itself. And as you go into the fourth picture, you can see another ramp. I don't have a photo of it, but directly where that photo is taken to the right is a large hill that goes up to the highway. And the building sits below the level of the highway.
If I can backtrack a little bit, if you turn to tab 1, included with the applications are photographs, and they look to be just rendered photographs of the view of the facility and the property from the highway.
Yes.
Be it 95 or 76. Let me know when you get to those photographs.
Yes, and these are the color renderings that were submitted with the application.
Okay. And do those accurately show, you know, what the property would look like should someone be traveling on 76 or 95?
Right, so this is a depiction of what the building would look like with the architectural wall features built up on the wall with these signs getting up above that highway level.
And you would agree with me that part of 95 and other features with respect to the road actually impede the sight from a traveler to the property?
Yes.
Okay. And are the signs proposed consistent with this application, consistent with U-Haul's prototypical signage?
Yes.
And can you please describe generally why the locations in this particular signage that you proposed in this application?
Yes, so this is where the main visibility for the property is for travelers. You get a lot of travelers on 95 and 276 going across the turnpike there. And as you go through the progression of this, you can see that the size of the signage is actually fitting for this facility. It is a very large facility. We'll get to it later on in the presentation, but I believe it's about 145,000 square foot facility. So it is a large property, but as you go through the projection of this sheet 1, 2, 2 of 11, 3 of 11, and 4 of 11, these are all views from the highway that you can see where our proposed signage is.
And did you make an application to the township for a permit for these signs?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And was that rejected?
Yes.
And that application and rejection are in tab 1, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And can you just briefly describe the faux doors and explain what they're intended for?
Yes, so the faux doors or garage doors, basically. It's a corrugated metal panel. It's orange in color, and what this actually is the same doors that you would see inside the U-Haul facility. If you were to rent a space from there, you would see that same door on the door that you would open to go into the facility. So that kind of just identifies the brand of U-Haul. That's their typical brand.
Is that in tab 9, the renderings of those faux doors?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And in your professional opinion, would you consider that a sign under the township's ordinance?
No, it would not.
And you're aware that the applicant's requesting interpretation that the faux doors are not signs?
Correct.
Okay. And are you familiar with section 206-165A2A of the zoning ordinance regarding the total area for a building sign? And just to keep things moving, specifically that it must be 15% of the 15% of the square feet of the total building, or 100 square feet, whichever is less.
Correct.
You aware of that? And that both those speak to the 15% of the exterior area of the front building wall, correct?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me that the ordinance is silent with respect to the size of the building, the lot, the location, or any of the surrounding features?
Correct.
Okay. And what is you said the size of the building is about 140,000 square feet?
Correct. The building is 145,000 square foot with almost 1,100 foot of frontage.
Okay. And what's the lineal footage on the front building wall?
1,098.
Okay. And how much signage would be permitted using the 15% of the front building wall?
Using the 15% calculation, they would be allowed roughly 3,300 square feet.
And how many signs are currently on the building?
A total of 6.
Okay. And what's the approximate square footage of the existing signs located at the building?
450 square feet.
Okay. And can you talk about the total area of the building signs being proposed?
Yes, so we're proposing, I think you maybe misspoke at the beginning, it's one sign for each elevation. So it's a total of 3 illuminated 7-foot by 12-foot signs for a total of 252 square foot, and then 3 non-illuminated signs that are 3 by 53 feet. And then if we haven't discussed the interpretation of the faux doors, but if we were calculating those in, that's additional square footage.
And in your professional opinion, based on the size and the existing building and the lot and everything you've testified before, is the proposed signage reasonable?
Yes, I believe so.
And can you please explain why?
We're proposing a total of, I have it here, 729 square foot of additional signage, whereas if we were calculating out the 15% of the total area of the front of the building, we would be allowed significantly more than that.
And then does it factor into your opinion that it's a larger parcel?
Correct.
And does it factor into your opinion that in certain parts there's concerns about visibility with other features, be it 95 or 76? Yes. Okay. And let me see if I can streamline this. If you go to tab 6, is that the illuminated sign box?
Can you streamline it to 2 minutes?
I can.
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, they are? Yes, yes,
Oh.
they can. And sir, do you in your professional opinion, are there unique physical characteristics that create a hardship for the applicant to comply with the signage?
Yes, just because it's such a large facility.
Okay. Is the applicant creating any of those unique, creating the hardship?
No.
Okay. Is this the minimum relief necessary to afford proper signage at the property?
Yes.
And in your professional opinion, will the grant of the variances be in harmony with the general purpose and welfare?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
All right, I got a question. On the illumination signs,
Yes.
do you know the foot candles of lumens? What do you mean, no?
I don't know off the top of my head.
You know, I'm an electrician, I gotta throw that out there, I'm sorry.
I have a little meter, you can study it though.
It's been a long
okay.
night for everyone.
Cindy, you wanna come up for or against this project, or? No, you good? All right. You're the only one left in the audience, is why I'm asking. Okay. All right, go ahead, you need a motion.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
To approve, right?
Approve.
To approve.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
Jim McMahon.
Yes.
Colleen Dunn.
Yes.
Ed Murphy, yes.
You got
just appreciate everyone's
All right. I need a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it.